IT. In retrospect, there had been omens and portents. "We are now approaching lunar sunrise," said William Anders. "And for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you." Rivers flowed uphill. A new star was seen in the night sky. A butchered pig was found to have the word "Omen" written on its liver in clearly visible letters. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Lightning struck in clear weather. Toads fell from the clouds. All 10,000 lakes in Minnesota turned to blood. Scientists blamed phytoplankton. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. A majestic golden eagle flew onto the Vatican balcony as Pope Paul VI was addressing the faithful. The bird gingerly removed the pontiff's glasses with its beak, then poked out his left eye before flying away with an awful shriek. "And God called the light day," said Jim Lovell, "and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. A beached whale was found hundreds of miles inland. A baby was born with 4 eyes. And God said, 'Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters.'" Pieces of paper with the word "omen" written on them fell from the clouds. A beached whale was seen in the night sky. Babies left unattended began to roll slowly, but unmistakably, uphill. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. One of the additional eyes on the 4-eyed baby was discovered to be the left eye of Pope Paul VI, missing since the eagle incident. The provenance of the 4th eye was never determined. "And God said, 'Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place,'" said Frank Borman, "and let the dry land appear," and it was so. A series of very precise lightning strikes seared the word "omen" into the rust-red sand of the Sonora Desert. Scientists blamed phytoplankton, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. The New York Stock Exchange rose by perfect integer amounts 11 days in a row. An obstetrician published an article in an obscure medical journal claiming that the kicks of unborn children, interpreted as Morse code, formed unspeakable and blood-curdling messages. "And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of—" Sudden burst of static, then silence. 2. If I had to choose a high point for the history of the human race thus far, it would be December 24th, 1968. 1968 had been a year of shattered dreams. Martin Luther King was murdered in April. Democratic golden boy Robert Kennedy was killed in June. Soviet tanks crushed the Prague Spring in August. It felt like each spark of hope for a better world was being snuffed out, methodically, one by one. Then, almost without warning, Americans turned on their televisions and learned that a spaceship was flying to the moon. On December 22nd, the craft beamed a live TV broadcast to Earth, informing viewers that they were about to become the first humans ever to orbit another celestial body. Communications issues limited the transmission to 17 minutes, but the astronauts promised a second installment from lunar space. On December 24th, 1968, 1 billion people, more than for any television program before or after in the history of mankind, tuned in for Apollo 8's short broadcast. The astronauts were half asleep, frazzled with days of complicated calculations and near disasters, but their voices were powerful and lucid through the static. Commander Frank Borman introduced the 2 other members of the crew. They described the moon, as seen up close, a vast, lonely, forbidding expanse of nothing, a very foreboding horizon, a rather dark and unappetizing-looking place. Then the Earth, as seen from afar, a green oasis in the big vastness of space. 2 minutes left till lunar sunrise broke the connection. The astronauts' only orders from NASA had been to do something appropriate. "In the beginning," read Bill Anders, "God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." So for 2 minutes on Christmas Eve, while a billion people listened, 3 astronauts read the Book of Genesis from a tiny metal can 100 miles above the surface of the moon. Then, mid-sentence, they crashed into the crystal sphere surrounding the world, because it turned out there were far fewer things in heaven and earth than were dreamt of in almost anyone's philosophy. It is good practice to have your program poke around at runtime and see if it can be used to give a light unto the Gentiles. King James, programming.tumblr.com, May 10th, 2017, Palo Alto. The apocalypse began in a cubicle. Its walls were gray, its desk was gray, its floor was that kind of grayish tile that is designed to look dirty so nobody notices that it is actually dirty. Upon the floor was a chair, and upon the chair was me. My name is Aaron Smith Teller, and I am 22 years old. I was fiddling with a rubber band and counting the minutes until my next break, and seeking the hidden transcendent names of God. Ar Ashkonchel Navansir, I chanted. That wasn't a hidden transcendent name of God. That wasn't surprising. During my 6 months at Countenance, I must have spoken 500,000 of these words. Each had taken about 5 seconds, earned me about 2 cents, and cost a small portion of my dignity. None of them had been hidden transcendent names of God. Ar Ashkonchel Navantisis, ordered my computer, and I complied. Ar Ashkonchel Navantisis, I said. The little countdown clock on my desk said I had 7 minutes, 39 seconds until my next break. That made a total of 459 seconds, which was appropriate, given that the numerical equivalence of the letters in the Hebrew phrase Arai Miklat, meaning city of refuge, summed to 459. There were 6 cities of refuge in biblical Israel, 3 on either side of the Jordan River. There were 6 10-minute breaks during my workday, 3 on either side of lunch. None of this was a coincidence because nothing was ever a coincidence. Ar Ash Conchel Naventazit, was my computer's next suggestion. Your Ash Conchel Navansit, I said. God created man in his own image, but he created everything else in his own image too. By learning the structure of one entity, like biblical Israel, we learn facts that carry over to other structures, like the moral law or the purpose of the universe. The rest is just commentary. Very, very difficult commentary, written in Martian, waiting to devour the unwary. Vislega ron tefenor ast talisa, roksuv vad apanor hov kareg rai My computer shifted to a different part of namespace, and I followed. 36 letters, a little on the long side. In general, the longer a name, the harder to discover, but the more powerful its effects. The longest known was the wrathful name, 50 letters. When spoken, it leveled cities. The Sefer Raziel predicted that the Shem HaMepharash, the explicit name which would capture God's full essence and bestow near omnipotence upon the speaker, would be 72 letters. Vis laiga rontefenor as astelisa, roksaf vodapanor hav keregrayas. People discovered the first few names of God through deep understanding of Torah, through silent prayer and meditation, or even through direct revelation from angels. But American capitalism took one look at prophetic inspiration and decided it lacked a certain ability to be forced upon an army of low-paid interchangeable drones. Thus the modern method. Hire people at minimum wage to chant all the words that might be names of God, and see whether one of them starts glowing with holy light or summoning an angelic host to do their bidding. If so, copyright the name and make a fortune. But combinatorial explosion is a harsh master. There are 22 Hebrew letters, and so 22 circumflex, 36 36-letter Hebrew words. Even with thousands of minimum wage drones like myself, it takes millions of years to exhaust all of them. That was why you needed to know the rules. God is awesome in majesty and infinite in glory. He's not going to have a stupid name like GLBLGLGLBLGLFLFLBG. The secret structure of everything. You could tease out regularities in the nature of God and constrain the set of possible names to something almost manageable, then make your drones chant that manageable set. This was the applied Kabbalah, the project of some of the human race's greatest geniuses. Visliges rontefenor est astelis, arok supvod apanor hov kereg raiua. I should have been one of those geniuses. Gabron in Eleazar's classic textbook says that only 4 Kabbalists have ever gazed upon Adam Cadman Bear, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Archangel Uriel, the Comet King, and an 8-year-old girl. I won't say I had gazed upon it bare, exactly, but in the great game of strip poker, every deep thinker plays against the universe. I'd gotten further than most. Then I fell from grace. My career was ruined before it even began when I was expelled from Stanford for messing with things mankind was not meant to know, by which I mean the encryption algorithms used by major corporations. Nobody wanted a 22-year-old Kabbalist without a college degree. It was like that scene in the Bible where God manifested himself upon Mount Sinai, but only to those Israelites who had graduated from Harvard or Yale. Not that I was bitter. Now here I was, doing menial labor for minimum wage. Vis laiga. Ron tefenor ast talisa. Roxuf vod apanor hov keregrai up. It would be a lie to say I stayed sane by keeping my mind sharp. The sort of mental sharpness you need for the Kabbalah is almost perpendicular to sanity. More like a very specific and redirectable schizophrenia. I stayed functional by keeping my mind in a very specific state that probably wasn't very long-term healthy. Vis lega ron tefenor ast talisa. Roxuf vod apanor hov kereg rai utes. The timer read 4:33, which is the length of John Cage's famous silent musical piece. 4:33 makes 273 seconds total. Minus 273 is absolute perfect silence. Absolute zero is perfect stillness. In the year 273 AD, the two consuls of Rome were named Tacitus and Placidianus. Tacitus is Latin for silence, and Placidianus is Latin for stillness. 273 is also the gematria of the Greek word eremon, which means silent or still. None of this is a coincidence because nothing is ever a coincidence. Vis ligaron tefenor ast talisa. Rock sup vod apanor hov kereg rayuk. Just as the timer on my desk dropped into the double digits, 59, the number of different numbers in the Book of Revelation, a man dressed in a black uniform stepped into my cubicle and told me he wanted to talk. I followed him into an empty office, and he sat me down and told me I was in trouble. This isn't the part that led to the apocalypse. That comes about an hour later. Have you been feeling tired lately? He asked in what he probably thought was a kindly manner. He was trying to sound like a therapist, but ended up sounding like a police officer trying to sound like a therapist. I looked above his ears for Hebrew tattoos. He didn't have any, which meant he hadn't caught me himself. He was the guy who had caught me had sent to do the dirty work. A little, I admitted. I knew where this was going. We had a report of somebody speaking the Awakening name directly, he said. Directly, vocally, forming the sounds myself instead of buying a scroll upon which someone else had written the letters while they were speaking them. Yes, I had done it. Yes, I knew it was illegal. Yes, I knew there was a chance of getting caught, but I'd done it 100 times before without any problem. So had half the people in this office. I guess my luck had finally run out. I nodded. I was really tired, I said, and the coffee machine was broken, and I'd left my scroll wheel at home. I'm sorry, I know it's against the law. I promise I won't do it again. I know it can sometimes be tempting to use names directly, he said, especially in a place like this, where you're working hard to develop new names yourselves. But you get your salary because people use names the right way. They buy the scrolls from the company that owns them and use them as directed. It's dangerous to use them yourself, and it's not fair to the people who work so hard to discover them, right? There were many things I could have said just then, but I just said right and looked bashful. He wrote me a ticket for $70, a whole day's wages. Not to mention the number of nations into which humankind was scattered after the Tower of Babel, the 70 years limit of the biblical human lifespan, the number of Israelites who entered into the land of bondage in Deuteronomy 10:22, the number of years of God's wrath in Zechariah 1:12, the year in which the Second Temple was destroyed, and the number of years that copyright law grants a creator exclusive rights to their work. A bitter, hopeless number. Then he warned me that the penalty would be higher if I was caught again. Warned me that he and his were watching me now, that maybe I had been living like this for a long time, but that wasn't going to fly anymore. Then he gave me some sort of a pat on the shoulder, which I think was supposed to be manly, maybe even paternal, and sent me back to work. I had missed my break. That was the worst part of all of it. I'd been humiliated, I'd lost $70, and I'd missed my break. I needed to vent. I lay back in my chair, closed my eyes, and concentrated as hard as I could. Narwhals of Jericho. No answer. Figured. I was too wired up to telepathy straight. So I reset the timer. One more shift. 1 more hour before I could go home. The computer fed me my next name candidate. I spoke. Vislega, Ron Tefanor est astelis, Arak Subvat a Panorhav Kereg Raisai. Ever since I lost my scholarship, I'd been treading water, trying to avoid starving to death until I could claw my way back into the intellectual world. For 6 months, I'd been telling myself that the job at Countenance was a stepping stone to bigger and better things. Maybe I could impress people here and move up from production floor drone to scientific advisor, become one of the guys who finds patterns in the divine names and helps narrow the search space. I could have done it. I'd already made discoveries in the field, small ones, but bigger than some made by theorists with good reputations and nice offices. But I had to get my foot back in the door. I was saving a couple $100 a month. With enough time, I could get enough money to supplement loans, maybe find myself another scholarship somewhere else. Even a community college would be better than this, make something of myself. And now all that was $70 further away. A minor setback, but still somehow infuriating. Maybe something that put me in the wrong frame of mind, changed how I interpreted what was to come. Korasta nami nami, tel the sokata ru. The minutes on the timer ticked down. The words on the computer kept coming. My energy slowly seeped away. The domino whose fall would precipitate the end of days teetered. There were 40 seconds on the timer when the computer gave me a monster. It started Ros el kafiluton, mirakoi kalaniemi, tashana kai kai, efsander, galizdo tahun. And it just kept going. 52 letters. 2 longer than the wrathful name. It was the longest name I'd ever been given to test, by far. I was shocked Countenance would even bother. I incanted Rosael Kafaluton Mirakoi Kalanami, Tishana Kaikayev Sander Galizdo Tahu, and until I reached the end of the word. It was not a name of God. I incanted Rosael Kafiluton Mirakoi Kalaniemi, Tishana Kaikayev Sander Galizdo Tahu, and until I reached the end of the next one. Rosael Kafiluton Mirakoi Kalaniemi, Tishana Kaikayev Sander Galizdo Tahun. And just as I finished, my timer reached 0 and told me I was finished. For today, free until tomorrow morning crashed down on me and I started the same thing all over again. Meh, I said. Meh, 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 meh. That was the part that led to the apocalypse. I was struck by a wave of holy light. The heavens opened and poured into me. My soul rang like a bell. 400 years earlier, an old man in Prague had explained to his students that yes, you could make a golem. You could bestow upon it the nefesh, the animal soul. With sufficient enlightenment, you could even bestow upon it the ruach, the moral soul. But the neshama, the divine spark, you could not bestow upon it, for that was a greater work, and would require a greater name than any ever discovered. 6,000 years earlier, the wind of God had moved upon the bare red dirt of Eden and shaped clay into the figure of a man. It stood there for a moment, a crude statue, and then a voice from heaven spoke a name, and the clay came to life. Lumbered into a standing position, it spoke a second name, and the clay's eyes opened, and within them were innocence and curiosity, and the capacity to wonder and learn. And it spoke a third name, and it was as if a light went on inside of it, and the dust became aware that it was dust, and in so doing was dust no longer. And that third name was 58 letters long. It began Ros El, Kafalutin Mirakoi, Kalanyemi, Tishana Kai Kai, Efsander, Galizdo, Tahun, and it ended meh, 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 meh. All this I saw, as in a dream or vision. 6 months and 500,000 nonsense words of pointless suffering suddenly redeemed. The possibilities swam in front of me, began to take form. This wasn't just a name. This was the royal road. It fed me, and it was mine. It was 6 syllables longer than any of them. Countenance would never find it. As I walked out of the office and headed for the Caltrain station, I tried to calm myself, give my mind the stillness it needed for telepathy to work. Finally, I sent out a feeler. Beilin Shim Tov, I said. A feeling, something more than nothing. Somebody was there. Anger said an internal voice that was not quite my own, although the telepathic link radiated only love. Then, Moabite Dick, I hate you. I thought back, but I sent through a burst of fondness. Anna and I had a running contest to come up with the worst biblical whale pun. She always won. Anna, something amazing just happened. You know our bets? Yes, the other voice said. I bet you I can become emperor of the world within a month. If I win, You have to give me a kiss. A feeling of surprise, not my own. Then suspicion. And what do I get if you can't? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'll buy you dinner. A pause. No, you're too stingy. You wouldn't promise to buy dinner unless you were sure you could win. So what's going on? Fess up. I'll be home in a few minutes. I'll show you. You know we have choir tonight? I forgot about that. I'll show you afterwards then. Tabernacle, said Anna. I will hate you forever, I thought cheerfully, then stepped onto the Cal train. The bustle of finding my seat broke the connection, which was just as well. We would start tonight. By the end of the week, we would have results. By the end of the month, the whole world would have changed. It was so clear to me. It was spread out before me, like Moses' vision of the Promised Land. Palo Alto, announced the train's loudspeaker. Palo Alto! Palo Alto is Spanish for tall tree. The phrase tall tree appears in the Bible, in Daniel 4. And it goes like this. I saw a tall tree out in a field, growing higher and higher into the sky, until it could be seen by everyone, in all the world. Then as I lay there dreaming, I saw one of God's angels coming down from heaven. And he shouted, Cut down the tree, lop off its branches, shake off its leaves, and scatter its fruit, for this has been decreed, so that all the world may understand that the Most High dominates the kingdoms of the world, and gives them to anyone he wants to, even the lowliest of men. Palo Alto, announced the loudspeaker again. Doors will be closing shortly. Palo Alto. This was not a coincidence, because nothing is ever a coincidence. March 14, 1969, Washington, D.C. Richard Nixon was confused and upset. It wasn't that he hadn't expected problems. He'd only been on the job 6 weeks, but he knew a president had to be ready for anything. But anything was supposed to mean economic downturns, or crime waves, or the Russians. Instead, Apollo 8 had crashed into some kind of weird space glass. The sky was cracking open, the clouds were forming ominous patterns, and Tuesdays had stopped happening. The Tuesdays were the most worrying part. For the past 3 weeks, people all over the world had gone to sleep on Monday and woken up Wednesday. Everything had been in order. The factories had kept running. Lawns had been mowed. Some basic office work had even gotten done. But of the preceding 24 hours, no one had any memories. Today was a Friday, and it had happened 3 times. The president had gone to sleep Friday night and woken up Friday morning to a call from the chief of staff, telling him that everyone was very upset because it was Friday morning again. And how was this happening? Everything that had happened in the past 24 hours had unhappened, been rolled back somehow. Or maybe everyone's Saturday morning consciousness had been shot back into their Friday morning bodies. He had no idea, and the American people were starting to demand answers. He'd called the head of the CIA and asked him to get whatever department full of eggheads had covered up Roswell as a weather balloon, tell them to concoct some plausible story for whatever chronological tomfoolery was going on now. The head of the CIA had just stood there unflappable. Mr. President, Roswell was a weather balloon. There was no cover-up. Our organization has no department dedicated to covering up inexplicable events. I'm the expletive-deleted President, Helms, Nixon had shouted. You don't have to lie to me. Get me your cover-up eggheads immediately. I'm sorry, Mr. President, he said coolly. There's no such agency. Expletive deleted, Nixon had answered. Get the expletive deleted out of here. Then he'd gone to NASA, the Department of Defense, and even the expletive-deleted National Bureau of Standards, which was apparently in charge of timekeeping and which he hadn't even known, expletive-deleted, existed until today. The today before today, yesterday. Expletive-deleted, expletive-deleted. None of them had been any more help than the expletive-deleted CIA. It was those cracks in the sky. He was sure of it. Apollo 8 had hit something important. The eggheads at NASA had posited some kind of nebulous envelope surrounding the orbit of the moon, made of compressed dust and gas. Apollo 8's collision had caused it to oscillate, creating the pattern of glowing, growing spiderweb cracks visible to anybody who looked up into the night sky. Richard Nixon didn't believe it, and neither, he figured, did anyone else. If only he could find those people who had covered up Roswell. They would know what to do. For the past 3 days, at 7:38 p.m. sharp, a red phone on his desk had started ringing. This was worrying for 2 reasons. First, the red phone was the symbol of the nuclear hotline between the US and Russia, the last-ditch line of communication to prevent a nuclear war. Second, the red phone was the symbol of the nuclear hotline. It was a prop he kept on his desk to show reporters. The actual nuclear hotline connected to a large and foreboding machine at the Pentagon that didn't look nearly as good in pictures. The red phone on his desk wasn't connected to a phone line, and, as far as he knew, didn't even have a ringer in it. The first day it started ringing, he'd stared at it for like 3 minutes before he finally dumbly picked it up. The voice on the other end was saying something he couldn't understand. It occurred to him that the people who monitored the actual nuclear hotline probably spoke Russian. The second today, he'd been suspicious that it would ring again at the same time, so he'd called an interpreter to the Oval Office. At 7:38 p.m., the interpreter had picked it up. "Hello," the interpreter had said, then started looking more and more puzzled. "This isn't Russian," he had said. Then, "This isn't related to any language I know." Then, "I don't think this is a real language." A few hours later, he'd sent over an analysis from the State Department, which concluded that the language consisted of the names of the capitals of various 16th-century European countries, arranged in seemingly random combinations. Today, Nixon hadn't bothered. He just sat in the Oval Office doing work. He had been meeting with a man from the Weather Bureau who wanted to tell him that the clouds were forming ominous patterns. Nixon hadn't bought it. "I'm the expletive-deleted President of the United States," he had told the man. "Do you want me to, expletive-deleted, tell you if it's a cold front or a warm front?" The man had clarified that he meant really ominous patterns, like some big thunderstorms in the Rockies were starting to develop high anvil-like peaks, which was within normal variability for this time of year, but also starting to develop domes and minarets and flying buttresses, which weren't. And although the Doppler radar didn't have good enough resolution to be sure, some of the buttresses were starting to look like they might have gargoyles on them, and before Nixon could say anything, the man had added that a Category 5 hurricane was forming in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was only March, and this literally never happened before July. And something was really wrong here. It was then, at 7:38 p.m., that the red phone started ringing. He considered not picking it up, but at least it would be differently confusing. To his surprise, the voice on the other end now spoke perfect English. "Hello, President Nixon. This is the Archangel Uriel. I apologize for recent disruptions. The machinery of the universe has been severely damaged. I am working to contain the effects, but at this point my power is limited because I am still mostly metaphorical. Please inform everyone that I regret the inconvenience. As compensation for your trouble, I have given every human the ability to play the piano." "Wait just a moment here," said Nixon. "Wait just an expletive-deleted moment." No response. The head of the Weather Bureau stared at the president shouting into a toy red telephone used as a prop for reporters, and visibly unconnected to any phone line. "Excuse me just a minute," said the president. "Of course," said the bureaucrat. President Nixon stepped out of the Oval Office and walked downstairs. He went down the corridor connecting the West Wing to the White House proper and entered the East Room, where Franklin Roosevelt's great Steinway piano stood on the hardwood floor. He sat down on the piano bench and performed a flawless rendition of Bach's Concerto Ars in D minor. "Expletive deleted," said the president. Jerusalem is builded as a city that is in the public domain. KingJamesProgramming.tumblr.com, May 10th, 2017. San Jose, right down the road from Berryessa Station. There's a big house with a hidden basement. The people who live there, usually 6 to 8 of us, rarely the same from one month to the next, are the sort of artsy college students and aimless 20-somethings who think that houses should have names. We call it Ithaca. 6 days out of the week, it's an ordinary group house, with the ordinary arguments about who has to cook and when the living room is going to get cleaned. But on Wednesday nights, people from all over the Bay Area gather in the basement to hold the secret rites of a faith banned throughout the civilized world. I took out my key and walked inside. I wasn't alone. The celebrants looked a lot like the rest of Silicon Valley, mostly male 20 or 30-somethings in jeans and hoodies, shuffling in awkwardly, grumbling about traffic. Their banality wasn't quite an act, but call it a facade. These were dangerous men. The enforcers of the shrouded Constitution have cracked the mobs, cracked the cartels. But these men of the ratty t-shirts and faded jeans, they have not cracked. A resistance that has never been broken, a cabal that spans centuries and crosses continents, fanatical, implacable, deadly. They were the Unitarian Universalist Church, the cracks in the sky, the death of Reverend Stevens, the shrouded Constitution. All of these had rent what was once a more innocent faith and driven it underground, forced it to change tactics. These were the new breed of Unitarians. A host of singers, cantors, open sorcerers, Marxist-Lurianists, rebels, seekers, Ginsburg had called angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. Never mind that the ancient heavenly connection had since been definitively located in a giant hurricane 300 miles off the coast of Louisiana, or that by this point the machinery of night was pretty much held together with duct tape and bubblegum. They burned still. One of them stood by the makeshift podium. Her hair was in something that made mohawks look conservative, and although you couldn't see it now, she had the flaming chalice symbol of Unitarianism tattooed on her shoulder. She was Erica Lowry, our fearless leader and editor of the Stevensite Standard Alternative newspaper. Also the leaseholder for our group home. Also Anna's cousin. She was chatting with a guy in a leather jacket, but she lit up when she saw me. "Aaron," she said. "I was worried you wouldn't make it." "Stuff happened at work today," I said, which was a candidate for understatement of the century. Also, the Caltrain was delayed in Palo Alto for like 10 minutes, for Kabbalistic reasons. Erica was used to this sort of commentary from me. She shot me a smile and turned back to the guy in the leather jacket. On the other side of the room I spotted Anna Thurmond, love of my life, and partner in biblical whale pun telepathy. She was reading a book and pretending to ignore everybody, while actually shooting me psychic commentary about some of the more unusual celebrants. "Oh no," she thought at me, as Bill Dodd and Karen Happick came through the door arm in arm. They finally started dating. God Most High help them both. Before I had time to reply, Erica had taken the podium and called the ancient and hoary to describe. She began by reciting a poem from a world spiritual tradition in which she found personal meaning. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, God's new Messiah, offering each the bloom or blight, parts the goats upon the left hand, and the sheep upon the right, and the choice goes by forever, twixt that darkness and that light. It was The Present Crisis by James Russell Lowell, Unitarian poet of the 1850s. Some say that the Unitarians of old were not as badass as they were today. But anyone who has read the poetry of James Russell Lowell knows this is not true. The Unitarians were always badass. Hast thou chosen, O my people, on whose party thou shalt stand, ere the doom from its worn sandals shakes the dust against our land? Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. And albeit she wander outcast now, I see around her throng troops of beautiful tall angels, to enshield her from all wrong. At this point I couldn't help stealing a glance at the lone angel in the room. Pirindiel was certainly tall and beautiful, but now he had a kind of awkward deer-in-the-headlights look, as if he was worried somebody was going to ask him to enshield them from all wrong, and he wasn't going to know what to do. Careless seems the great avenger. History's pages but record one death grapple in the darkness twixt old systems and the word. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. There was something about James Russell Lowell that made him perfect for the counterculture. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. The system was evil. Persecuted are righteous. If they were not righteous, they would not be persecuted. Anna was the Augustine Distinguished Scholar in Theodicy at Stanford, and she hated this stuff. We see dimly in the present what is small and what's great. Slow of faith, how weak an arm may turn the iron helm of fate. But the soul is still oracular. Amid the market's din, lists the ominous stern whisper from the Delphic cave within. They enslave their children's children who make compromise with sin. Yes, said Erica, and her voice reverberated through the crowded basement. They enslave their children's children who make compromise with sin. Then she began her sermon. She talked about Royal Colorado, how just 5 days ago, a cell of Unitarians much like our own had been meeting peacefully in a home in Denver, and someone had tipped off Unsong, and the men in black had come for them. It should have been much like my own confrontation earlier that day. Lectures. Maybe some arrests, followed by short trials, followed by fines or probations, or who knows. Maybe they would have tried to make an example of them. It didn't matter because someone had spoken the tempestuous name. One of the congregants? Acting out of shock and self-defense when he saw the door shatter to splinters and a dozen men pointing guns at him? He spoke the tempestuous name, and then the guns started shooting, and by the time it was over, 2 Unsong agents and 11 Unitarians were dead. The biggest disaster to hit the church, since it was driven underground, maybe. And the worst part would be that the government wouldn't apologize. They'd blame the whole thing on the Unitarians, plaster the news with pictures of the 2 slain agents, and crack down on us twice as hard. And Erica spoke about this, and she spoke well. She hit all the stops. She talked about how grief-stricken we were as part of the global body of Unitarians, and how enraged we were as untied state citizens. And not let this break our resolve. She even made a token reference on how we must not let this turn us to violence, even though she kind of liked violence, and it was hard for her to say it convincingly. I can't tell you what to feel, she concluded. All I can say is that they knew what they were getting into, and so do we. We swore to spread the thousand names of God, and even though I can't tell you the same won't happen here, I can promise the church leadership is doing everything it can to ensure that it won't. So a few words about security from our choir director, Brother Aaron. Yes, God Most High help me. I was supposed to offer words on security. Me, the guy who had gotten a $70 fine earlier that day for using a divine name to wake me up because the coffee pot was empty. One of my few true talents is an ability to stride confidently to the front of things, as if I am going to someplace I have every right to be. I strode confidently to the front of the assembly. Hi, I said. I'm Brother Aaron. The short version of our safety plan is that we are going to be extremely boring and do everything by the book and not stand out or draw attention to ourselves in any way. Hi, I said in my imagination. I'm Aaron Smith Teller. I know we're not supposed to give out our full name at church, but since you know where I live and what I look like, it's kind of silly to haggle over full names, isn't it? We should probably stop pretending that our cute little Alcoholics Anonymous game gives any real protection. If Unsong ever really wants us, we're all fucked. Whenever you use a protected name of God, I continued, Unsong agents with the Sentinel name tattooed above their ear, and the names involved tattooed on their foreheads, can track your location. In practice, they rarely do, because 1 million people do that every day. And they don't have 1 million agents, or 1 million jail cells to sorts of names in the same spot every day. They know it's a place where singers hang out, and then if they're bored, then they come and raid you. This is probably what happened in Colorado. We have no idea who Unsong can and can't track, I said in my imagination. The Coloradans weren't stupid enough to consistently use names in their hideout, because no one is that stupid. So something else went wrong. We could do everything by the book and all get arrested tomorrow. So, I said, here are some things you can do if you're an idiot who wants to be caught. You can use names in your own house. You can use names here. You can use a name in the same spot multiple times. And you can use a really new name that lots of bigwigs care about. So, I said in my imagination, here are some things I have done multiple times. Use names I have no idea what they do. Use names in ways that cause giant catastrophes. Use the same name that caused a catastrophe again, just to see if it would magically work the second time, which it never does. Been something like the 3rd person on Earth to use a name I didn't even need, just for the adrenaline rush and street cred. Last, I said, remember that we can limit any damage that happens. Unsong's got to operate within the law. No one can torture you or force information out of you. They can't even silence you without a court order. As soon as you realize you're in trouble, sing yourself the confounding name and forget all about us. If that doesn't work, reveal one of our false leads to them. They'll go in, see the evidence we planted, and figure we got spooked and abandoned it just before they arrived. Last, I said in my imagination, Director General Ngo is by all accounts terrifying, and it's really easy here in our nice safe basement to say that they can't torture you, but someone in Colorado said books and CDs in an abandoned factory might or might not fool Unsong's finest, but I wouldn't want to have to be the schmuck who tests it. Oh, I added, if worst comes to worst, and secret police burst through those doors right when I finish talking, no tempestuous name, please. Better we all get a couple years in jail for criminal copyright infringement than die. I said the same thing in my imagination, only more condescendingly. We will now begin choir. 50 years ago, Apollo 8 cracked the sky open, and people started discovering the names of God. A decade later, corporations started patenting them, demanding license fees for anyone who wanted to work miracles with them. A decade after that, they codified the whole system into international law and created Unsong, the United Nations Subcommittee on Names of God, to enforce it. And a decade after that, people started asking, why are we allowing this? Everything we know about God suggests that he loves all humans and is not a fan of the rich getting richer. First came Reverend Stevens and his book. Then came the political movement, growing out of local Unitarian churches that insisted that God loved everyone alike, and therefore everyone alike must know his names. And finally, when every legitimate avenue of resistance had been crushed, there came groups like ours, stealing what names we could find and teaching them to one another in hidden forests or dark basements, spreading the illegal knowledge in preparation for, well, okay, the endgame wasn't exactly our strong point. Reverend Stevens had said that once enough people knew the names, it would spark a revolution in consciousness, an immanentization of the eschaton, as the holy essence reverberated within the minds of all life. Sure, let's go with that. Expelled from Stanford and taking minimum wage jobs to make ends meet, and being treated like scum by everyone in academic Kabbalah. Here, all I needed to do was have some basic familiarity with the names, know a couple of impressive-sounding things about Maharaj ranking, and I was choir director and a leading scientific authority. That felt good. And given all that the big theonomics companies had done to me, helping screw them over was icing on the cake. My life was already in the toilet. The same self-destructive urge that had led me to use the Wakening name at work bound me here to Erica and her people. Tonight, I said, we're going to practice something very special. This is the Vanishing Name? Has anyone heard of the Vanishing Name before? No one raised their hands. That's because it was discovered 3 weeks ago, I told them, to multiple oohs and ahs. Fresh Meat, a sweatshop in Pittsburgh, picked it up, and somehow it got leaked to a Unitarian cell in Cleveland, and they were able to break the klipa and send letters to a dozen Unitarian cells around the country within 15 days of discovery. I was pretty sure that some of my own work in clipotic reversal algorithms had contributed, actually, but I resisted the urge to boast. What does the Vanishing Name do? It's no less than a form of teleportation. Speak the name, and you disappear and reappear somewhere else within a few hundred miles. According to my sources, one of the test subjects in Pittsburgh ended up in Akron, and another one in Erie. The precise range is unknown, and the destination doesn't seem to be under voluntary control. Hence the label. It's useful for getting out of a situation, but not necessarily getting into one. Useful for example, underground Unitarian choir members in exactly the types of problems we're hoping to avoid. So what's the catch? The Vanishing Name teleports you to a situation complementary to the one you were trying to get out of. Both of the testers in Pittsburgh, for example, ended up in laboratories devoted to the testing of Kabbalistic names. So there you are in a laboratory, testing a Kabbalistic name in Pittsburgh, and you speak the name, and you end up in a laboratory testing a Kabbalistic name in Akron. This creates an obvious limit to its usefulness. I've been corresponding with the choir director of a Unitarian congregation in San Antonio. She was in the bad part of town and got accosted by hooligans, so she spoke the Vanishing Name. It teleported her to the bad part of Austin, where another band of hooligans was looking for someone to accost. She used the name a second time and ended up back in San Antonio with the first group of hooligans because the complement of the situation's complement is just the original situation. So she went secular and used her pepper spray. The lesson is clear. Additional uses of the Vanishing Name are unlikely to gain you very much. Any questions? There were none. Second, and this relates to what I said before, I don't need to remind you that using this name would be really stupid. It's new. Unsong is looking for it. You're learning this name because it is your duty as a Unitarian and a human being to learn and spread the thousand names of God. Unless you're In a situation where it is absolutely vital to your well-being and continued survival that you be accosted by a different band of hooligans than the ones who are currently accosting you, this name should be considered Unsong bait and therefore verboten. Do you understand? The congregation understood. Very well, I said. Let us learn the vanishing name. There were 28 of us there, 27 humans plus Pirindiel. Angels cannot sing the names, and only 20 of the humans were moral support, political debates, some sort of sad countercultural version of networking, or the free refreshments afterwards. So I led the way, and 19 voices followed. The names of God are long and apparently meaningless. If you're not a freaky mnemonist like me, they're hard to remember. I don't know who first figured out that if you sing them to a melody, they'll stick with you longer. But so they do. That's why we call it choir practice, why I'm choir director, why the people who learn the names are called singers or cantors. The 20 of us joined together in song. Asat, I sang. Asat, echoed 19 voices. Zam, Zam, Rus, Russ. Asat, Zam, Russ. Asat, Zam, Russ. You're going to finish this quickly, skip the food, and tell me how you'll become world emperor soon, right? Shh, I'm trying to concentrate. The Gospel according to Fluke. Epistle to Philemonstro, also at $%u. Asat zam, sorry, where were we? Asat zam rushan sever las kion di alathen tri kofuli martande. Asat zam rus shan sever las kion dalat hen tri kofuli martande. This was not the vanishing name. It didn't really end with day, and it didn't quite start with Asat. If you sang a name straight out, you'd invoke it, and then, depending on which name it was, you'd end up teleporting to a Unitarian choir 3 towns over, or summoning a tempest, or destroying a city. So in order to communicate a name without activating it, you needed to sing something that was almost, but not quite, the real name. A transformation. One you could easily perform and reverse at will. There was already one such transformation well known to every red-blooded American. It was strange and almost sacrilegious, but every week we returned. Unsong and the Theonomics corporations couldn't be allowed to whore out the names of God unchallenged. A revolution was coming. To get a monopoly on the divine without fighting for it. And that was why every Wednesday night the choir of the Unitarian Church would meet in secret and sing the hidden transcendent names of God in Pig Latin. For the Lord will work for each type of data it is applied to. KingJamesProgramming.tumblr.com. The Code of the World by Aaron Smith Teller. Published in the March 2017 issue of the Stephen Site Standard, the Talmud says that God created the Torah 974 generations before he created the world. Generations of who? I don't know. The Talmud is kind of crazy. But the Torah is basically a few short stories about creation and the distant past, followed by a long and intricate biography of Moses. Why would God care so much about one Israelite guy that he would lovingly sketch out his story long before the first day rose upon the universe in which that guy was to live? There's another episode in the Talmud, one where Moses is ascending Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. God discusses how carefully he wrote the Torah over countless eons, and the angels say, "Then why are you giving it to this Moses guy? Who's he? Some random mortal nobody. We're angels. Give it to us." Moses argues that the people of Israel are sinful and so need it more. The angels accept his reasoning, but this argument is less interesting for what it says than for what it leaves out. Moses doesn't say, guys, have you even read the Torah? 4 of the 5 books are totally about me personally. There's even a section describing how God gives me the Torah, in the Torah. How can you challenge my right to have my own biography? The rabbis explain this by dividing Torah into the historical Torah, meaning the records of Moses' life, and the legal Torah, meaning the ritual code. God wrote the legal Torah beforehand. The angels wanted the legal Torah for themselves, but that doesn't work either.
Take a look at the legal Torah, and it's all sorts of rules about which kinds of animals to eat and which close relatives are too close to have sex with. This also seems like the sort of thing you don't necessarily need to have finished 974 generations before you create the world.
And it also seems like the sort of thing that angels don't have to worry about. So what's up? Before I propose an answer, a survey of some apparently unrelated fields. Cosmic history begins deep in the past, but shortly after the Big Bang, the universe cooled down long enough to allow mass and the breaking of symmetry into the laws of physics. Natural history begins deep in the past, but goes into high gear billions of years ago with the appearance of mitosis, the replication process which allowed the reproduction and evolution of all subsequent life. Mitosis replicates and preserves the genetic code of DNA, which determines animal phenotype. Human history begins deep in the past, but goes into high gear after the rise of the Mesopotamians, history's first civilization. Shortly afterwards, these developed the Code of Hammurabi, ancestor of all the law codes in all the states and governments that came afterwards. American history begins deep in the past, but goes into high gear after the American Revolution starts in Massachusetts. Shortly afterwards, the Americans ratify the Constitution, the law of the land. Each of these apparently unrelated forms of history starts deep in the past, but experiences a sudden phase change marked by the letters MSS in that order, followed shortly by the establishment of a code of laws. So when we find that the Bible begins with the creation of the world, but experiences a phase change marked by a man named Moses, and then the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, maybe we should interpret this as being about a little bit more than just one guy won. Gibran and Eleazar define Kabbalah as hidden unity made manifest through patterns of symbols, and this certainly fits the bill. There is a hidden unity between the structures of natural history, human history, American history, biblical history, etc. At an important transition point in each, the symbols MSS make an appearance and lead to the imposition of new laws. Anyone who dismisses this as coincidence will soon find the coincidences adding up to an implausible level. The Kabbalistic perspective is that nothing is a coincidence. We believe that the universe is fractal. It has a general shape called Adam-Kadmon, and each smaller part of it, from the Byzantine Empire to the female reproductive system, is a smaller self-similar copy of that whole. Sometimes the copies are distorted, like wildly different artists interpreting the same
theme, but they are copies nevertheless. For example, consider the objection that Chinese history does not fit the pattern. Yes, it starts in the beginningless past and transitions into a more civilized form with the arrival of a lawgiver. But that lawgiver is named Confucius, and there is no M sound followed by two S sounds in his name, a sign that the structure has failed? No. Confucius gave the laws, but they did not achieve prominence until they were recorded and interpreted by his successor, Mencius. The narrative and phonological aspects have been split into two closely related people, too. Other times, two separate people in the Bible get merged into a single character. Consider Moses and Adam. Moses leads the Israelites to freedom, destroys the Egyptian army by crossing the Red Sea, gets the commandments, and serves as the first leader of the Israelite people. Adam transgresses his heavenly Father's commandment not to touch a fruit tree. But in American history, both these aspects are merged into the person of George Washington. It is Washington who leads the Americans to freedom, destroys the British Army by crossing the Delaware, gets the Constitution, and serves as the first leader of the American people. But it is also Washington who transgresses his father's command not to touch a fruit tree. Further, the Adamic and Washingtonian stories are subtly different. Adam tries to deflect blame. It was the woman who bade me eat. But Washington humbly accepts it. I cannot tell a lie, Father. I cut down the cherry tree. Thus Israel is born fallen, but America is born pure. A shining city on a hill, 3. Here we also see the same division between semantic and phonetic 4 aspects, as in the Confucius example. Washington's successor was named Adams, and came from Massachusetts. Note that the biblical Adam was created beside the tree of knowledge, and John Adams was born in Braintree. Other correspondences are spread even further afield. Moses' wife was named Zipporah, Hebrew for female bird, but her American counterpart doesn't show up until LBJ. It took all the way until the turn of the millennium before America listened to a bush and then got stuck wandering in a desert without an exit strategy.
Twist and stretch as it may, the underlying unity always finds a way to express itself. If you're a science type, think of the cells in the human body. Every cell has the same genes and DNA, but stick one in the brain,
and it'll become a brain cell. Stick it in the skin, and it'll become a skin cell. A single code, giving rise to infinite variety. If you don't understand the deep structure they all share, you'll never really understand brains or skin or anything else. The Torah is the deep structure of the universe, and structure is exactly the word for it. It's pure, utterly formal, meaningless on its own, but stick it in a situation, and its underlying logic starts to clothe itself in worldly things. Certain substructures get expressed, the certain others shrivel away. Certain relationships make themselves known. Finally, you get a thing. Box turtles, international communism, Africa, whatever. If you're not looking for the structure, you won't find it. If you are, it's obvious.
At the crucial moment in the Hebrew Bible, a man named Moses is born, ordains new laws, and changes the destiny of Israel. If you're a biblical Hebrew, then to you that's the Torah. If you're an angel, the Torah is something different. And if you're God, 974 generations before the creation of the world, the Torah is all of these things, and none. Just a set of paths and relationships and dependencies pregnant with infinite possibilities. A seed. Understand the seed and you understand everything that grows from it. This is the Kabbalah. The rest is just commentary. Super important commentary. The kind of commentary that's the difference between a sloughed-off skin cell and a thinking brain. Footnotes 1. Moses was supported in his mission by his brother Aaron, who is significant among Kabbalists for bearing the Shem HaMepharash on his forehead. Mass is carried by baryons. In mitosis, DNA is helped along by its relative RNA. The Mesopotamians were trading partners and allies with their relatives across the Tigris in Iran. Massachusetts was ably defended by the New England branch of the Continental Army led by Benedict Arnold. 2. The RN word associated with Confucius is clearly Ren, his concept of benevolence, which plays a preeminent part in his Analects. The Analects themselves are cognate with mass complement energy, mitosis, anaphase, Mesopotamia's Anunnaki, and Arnold's Canada campaign. 3. The original city on a hill was Jerusalem, with its temple upon Mount Moriah. As per the Bible, King David bought the temple site for 600 shekels and King Solomon decorated it with 600 talents of gold. King Herod later rebuilt it 600 feet by 600 feet in size. The name of America's capital, Washington, is followed by D.C., which is Roman gematria for 600. 4. We can analyze the name George Washington as follows. George means farmer in Greek, which is clearly related to the name Adam, meaning dirt in Hebrew. Adam was banished from Eden and sentenced to till the dirt from which he was made. Washing means to place under water in English, which mirrors Moses, meaning to draw out of the water in Hebrew. But washing also means to cleanse, and ton means town, referring to the polis, or state. So George Washington references similarities with both Adam and Moses, but also contains an additional meaning of the one who cleanses the state. He purifies it from corruption and foreign influences. September 29th, 1990, Gulf of Mexico. Ever since the sky cracked, there has been a hurricane off the coast of Louisiana that never moves or decays. In its eye stands the archangel Uriel. He is 500 feet tall, and around him whirl colorful streams of letters from every alphabet and syllabary and abjad of every culture in history, making subtle and complex geometric patterns before they disappear in bursts of rainbow light. Occasionally, he reaches out and snatches one with his colossal hand and inserts it elsewhere in the stream, and then rain falls, or empires crumble, or new islands rise from the deep. Today, he is doing none of those things. Today, he is looking very carefully at something no one else can see, and talking to himself. Tiferet, he says. The sun, beauty, miracles, but also reversal. A mirror set at the center of the tree, reflecting whatever it sees. He stares more intently now.
A pulse of energy from Bina to Hesed, then a return pulse from Hesed to Bina. The letter Kuf, but doubled, reflected. Now he pauses. Something is missing. Tiferet arcing downward to Netzach. A Yud, two cuffs reflected about a Yud. The colored streams of letters around his head whirl more wildly now. Ka'af Yud, Koav, a kayak. Something important is happening involving a kayak.
The stream slowed down.
Somewhere in the wide world, something is happening involving a kayak, something important enough to disturb the subtle threads of the machinery of heaven. Is it a prophet being carried down a river in Asia? A future king traversing an ocean in Europe? Is the kayak metaphorical? On the river of time, on the ocean of knowledge? Might it? A kayak shot out of the walls of cloud at 200 miles an hour and missed Uriel's head by half an inch. Oh God, help! I don't know how to steer! Help, help, help! Somebody help! I can't steer! Someone screamed. Only slightly off balance, the Archangel reached out a hand in front of his face, stared at it with his giant eyes. "Hello?" said the Archangel. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, I couldn't steer," she said. She was young, even for a human, maybe only 7 or 8 years old. She had light brown skin, dark brown eyes, braided black hair. She was wearing a life jacket. She was obviously terrified. Finally, she managed to pull herself together and said, "My name is Sohu. My father said I should ask you to teach me the Kabbalah." That is not really the kind of thing that I do. There are humans who do that, I think. Father said it had to be you." "I am busy," said Uriel. They stared at each other for a moment, the girl, sopping wet, still shaking, still holding the paddle. The Archangel, taller than the hills, dressed in luminous white, with great golden wings protruding from his back, and eyes that glowed gold like the sun. "Please," asked the girl. "I am busy. I'm trying to fix continental drift. I didn't know it was broken." Uriel's face became more animated, his speech faster. "It has been broken for 5 weeks and 5 days. I think it broke when I reloaded New Zealand from a backup copy, but I do not know why. My synchronization was impeccable, and the change propagated simultaneously across all Sephiroth. I think somebody boiled a goat in its mother's milk. It is always that. I keep telling people not to do it, but nobody listens." Sohu looked at him dubiously, then gently laid her paddle down across her lap. "If you teach me the Kabbalah, I could try to help you fix continental drift." "No," said Uriel. "I work celestial Kabbalah. It is beyond the reach of humans. If you tried to touch the emanations of the higher worlds, they would pass through your hands like shadows." Sohu reached up and plucked one of the letters from the cloud, and a string of other letters followed after her, bunching up into her hand. The glyphs turned first blue, then purple, then one of the 3 nameless colors you only see in dreams. Then they all started changing into other glyphs more quickly than the eye could follow. Uriel let out a loud shriek. Suddenly, he was all action. Dropping girl and kayak, he snatched at the glowing letters, sewing them into a new pattern with superhuman speed, working so quickly it seemed he had dozens of hands acting at once. Waves of color flowed through the vast design. Just before Sohu crashed against the ocean below, the Archangel reached down and caught kayak and girl, lifting them back level with his face. Sorry. What did I do? Asked Sohu, who was back to being terrified again. "You might have sort of made all of the rivers in the world run in reverse." "I'm so sorry, really, I didn't mean to." "It is okay, I fixed them." Then, "Wait, how did you do that?" "I just reached out and grabbed one of those letters." "Those letters span worlds. They are beyond the reach of humans. You should not have been able to touch them." "I was playing outside the other day, and I saw a letter like those, and I grabbed it, and flowers started growing all over. And then Father got a very stern look on his face and said I was to get in the flying kayak and find the Archangel Uriel and make him teach me the Kabbalah." "Wait, are you that Sohu? I think I might be the only person named Sohu." "Oh." They stared at each other. "Do others in your family have this gift?" "No, I asked them," said Sohu. "But they can't wiggle their ears either." "No one can wiggle their ears!" Sohu wiggled her ears. The Archangel stood there for a moment in perfect silence. All around him, strings of letters snaked and wound above his head, under his arms, through his fingers. Sometimes 2 strings would collide in midair, or shatter into their component parts, or swarm like hornets. "Are you all right?" Sohu finally asked. "I was trying to wiggle my ears." Sohu wiggled her ears again. "You are very interesting. So will you teach me the Kabbalah?" "No." "Why not?" "You would probably destroy the world." "Would not," said Sohu. "I like the world. I would help you fix continental drift." "No," said Uriel. "Why not?" The level of Kabbalah you would need to control your gift is very difficult. It is not just about grabbing letters from the sky. You would need to understand the letters and the Sephirot and the angels and thousands of correspondences. You would have to memorize the entire Bible. I know the Bible, said Sohu. Uriel's great golden eyes narrowed. Joshua 1:8, he demanded. Sohu closed her eyes, thought for a second. Let this book of the law be ever on your lips and in your thoughts day and night, so that you may keep with care everything in it. Then a blessing will be on your way, and you will do well. Exodus 31:3. I have filled you by the Spirit of God with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and the ability to do all kinds of work. Jezubod 4:33. There's no book of Jezubod. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. Yes, Uriel stood very quietly for a moment. The streams of letters ceased flowing. Then, all of a sudden, he said a very unangelic word. I think I forgot to give mankind the book of Jezubod. Was it important? The archangel started fidgeting awkwardly. Some more fidgets. No. I want to learn about Jezubod and all the others. Will you teach me the Kabbalah? No, said Uriel. Please! Uriel stared at the little girl sitting in her kayak in the palm of his hand. A quick calculation. If he dropped her, it would take 4.9 seconds for her to hit the ocean's surface at a velocity of 48.5 meters per second. 29.4 kilojoules, which was more than enough to break a human skull. The girl's father wouldn't even be angry. What had he expected, sending her to him, flaunting a gift no human should be able to have? If he sent her off, sooner or later, she would try something innocuous-looking and make all the rivers in the world run uphill again, or boil the oceans, or otherwise do something so horrible it couldn't be solved by simple things like reloading New Zealand from a backup copy. But if he trained her, then she could boil the oceans whenever she wanted. That was hardly an improvement, and he hated company. And he was very busy. There was never enough time. On the other hand, he absolutely had 4.9 seconds. 4.9 seconds, and his problem could be over. The thing was, he had never killed anybody before. Okay, that was completely false. He'd smitten some towns that he thought ruined various pleasing symmetries on maps. He'd erased Taiwan when he couldn't figure out how to debug it. There was that whole debacle with the Red Sea. He might have kind of created the bubonic plague just to see if it would work. It had. He'd caused several earthquakes to make the stupid tectonic plates line up right. There had been that one time he had forgotten to turn off the rain, and large parts of Belgium ended up underwater with a death toll in the hundreds of thousands. But he'd never killed a specific human. Wait, no. That was also completely false. He'd smitten people who were using up too many system resources, or who were trying to go into areas he hadn't finished simulating in the necessary level of fidelity. And of course, people who were boiling goats in their mother's milk, or who were planning to boil goats in their mother's milk, or who looked like the sort of people who might do that. But he'd never killed an 8-year-old girl before. This will be very hard, and neither of us will enjoy it, said Uriel. I'll enjoy it, said Sohu. You will have to stay here, in the hurricane, without any friends to talk to. I can be friends with you. The system of the world is gradually decaying, and one day soon it will fall apart entirely. The job of maintaining it until that moment is thankless and unpleasant, and you can never stop or else everyone dies. I can help, said Sohu. Uriel let out a long sigh. You will start by memorizing the Book of Jezubod while I fix continental drift. His great fingers spun the streams of colorful letters around him into a cloud, upon which he gingerly deposited girl and kayak. From another stream, he formed a book, which he presented to her. Read, he'd said. 1. And it came to pass that in the 8th year of Ahab, Jezubod made a burnt offering in the temple of the Lord too, and he spoke, saying, O God, whose wisdom spanneth the heavens and the earth, I'm learned in Scripture, yet much still troubles me. 3. Why the many apparent contradictions? Whence the emphasis on ritual purity, and which books are literally true, and which meant only to edify? 4. Then, out of a fiery cloud before him, there appeared the archangel Uriel, whose eyes shone like the sun. 5. And he said with a mighty voice, 6. Okay, let me clear all of this confusion up right now, so no one else ever has to worry about it.
And ye shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into effective devices for computing in any direction. King James Programming.tumblr.com, May 10th, 2017, San Jose. Even before Erica finished formally adjourning the meeting, I wove my way through the crowd of garrulous people and up the stairs into my bedroom. I grabbed my laptop from the desk, then knocked on Anna's door. She was there waiting for me. She sat down on the bed. I sat down on the floor. She stretched, cracked her back, cracked her neck, took a deep breath. "Now what is all this about the world?" she asked me. "Today at work, I accidentally discovered a name that gives souls to non-living objects. Like, not just turns them into golems, but actual souls. Nobody knows. Wasn't a work name. Euphemism," said Anna. She got the implications immediately. "Wait, a month? You should be world emperor within a week." The basis of the information age was brute force generation of Kabbalistic names. That meant me and thousands like me on factory floors, reading potential names and seeing if they worked any miracles. Given the billions of potential combinations, you needed a whole lot of employees working a whole lot of hours for a whole lot of time in order to get anywhere at all. Every other field had been revolutionized by automation. Tailors had their sewing machines. Builders had their bulldozers. Manufacturers had their industrial robots. And so about 30 years ago, someone had the bright idea, why not automate the generation of divine names? A factory with 100 workers, each testing one name every 20 seconds, all working 8-hour days, discovers a new name of 10 letters or more about once a month. If a computer could test 1,000 names a second, 24 hours a day, it could discover a new name almost every hour. A name must be spoken. It can't merely be subvocalized or sounded out completely in the imagination, so fine. Connect the computer up to a speaker. Have it speak 1,000 times faster than any human, until the stream of names just sounds like a uniform high-pitched hum. Then write a program that calculates potential names off some open-source namespace software, plays them from the speaker, and records the ones that work. That program was Lull, a terrible and wonderful thing, capable in theory of putting the entire Kabbalah industry out of business, of advancing the magical capability of humankind 1,000-fold in a few days. And in the end, useless. Computers cannot speak the hidden transcendent names of God. Or, well, they can. But nothing happens. No wave of light crashes through their silicon brains. No revelation fries their integrated circuits. They just keep on beeping and clicking, oblivious. And theoretical Kabbalah has only one good explanation. Computers must lack the divine spark. Lull was programmed by hobbyists and academics and had no practical utility. It was used in a few research applications, then abandoned to any amateur who might want to play around with it. But if someone were to come up with a way to give a computer the divine spark, to ensoul it, well, that person would have something producing names 1,000 times as fast as the average sweatshop. Since there are about 1,000 sweatshops seeking divine names all over the world, that one person with his single computer would have a magical discovery rate equal to the rest of the world combined. The very least he could expect would be to become stupendously rich. And what if, with all that money, he were to buy a second computer? What about a third computer? What about a giant Cray supercomputer that thought so quickly that it needed liquid nitrogen pumped through it every second of every day to prevent its manic cognition from frying its own brains? Hooked up to hundreds of speakers in parallel, testing millions of names per second? In an hour, you could gain more sorcerous power than the entire human race had discovered since the sky cracked. Hire a clever mathematician to narrow the search space, and you'd be within reach of the Shem HaMepharash itself, with the power to remake worlds. I hadn't just discovered an especially long name. I had discovered the key to the Royal Road. No, don't mock me. This is worth mixing metaphors for. Are you going to tell Erica? If I tell Erica, half the Unitarians in California will know within an hour. Erica's great, but she's not exactly the best person at keeping her mouth shut. I trust nobody with this. Nobody. You trusted me. I didn't have a choice. Oh, right. Anna plucked the vital name out of my head. Gotcha, she said. So, you want to give our laptop souls? I want to give my laptop a soul, I said. Lull only works on Macs, remember? I had an old Ni1 series MacBook. I'd named it Sarah after my desktop wallpaper of Sarah Michelle Gellar striking a sexy pose. Anna had an even older PC. She'd named it Captain Smith after the officer who'd slammed the Titanic into an iceberg because of its tendency to crash and freeze. They still haven't euphemism come out with the Windows version? Anna asked. Of course not, I said. It wouldn't be Kabbalistically appropriate. Apples and knowledge have always had a special relationship. Adam tasted knowledge and was thrust from Eden. Newton had knowledge strike him suddenly out of the blue. Turing's knowledge was bitter and led him to an early grave. Knowledge brings discord. Knowledge ripens. Knowledge is poisoned. Men greedily devour the exterior of knowledge, but the core they do not reach. Knowledge was first domesticated in southern Turkey or northern Mesopotamia, from which it spread to the rest of the world, although some scholars claim its modern genome owes more to various European ancestors. Most historians believe it was first brought to the New World by colonists, but this ignores the existence of Native American varieties, which unfortunately have been mostly displaced and are now endangered. The first and second leading producers of knowledge at the current time are America and East Asia. Although knowledge originally reproduced through cross-pollination with other knowledge, modern industrial growers have taken to a grafting process similar to cloning. As a result, the sorts of knowledge everywhere are pretty much the same. This makes producing knowledge for commercial sale much easier, but has led some to opine that a once vast diversity and varieties of knowledge has been irrecoverably lost. The apple symbol on Sarah's lid glowed balefully. Anna couldn't quite follow my thoughts, but she got the gist of them, put her hand on my shoulder. You okay? Sorry, I mumbled. Big step we're about to take, she said. The biggest, I agreed. You want to do the honors? I double-clicked on the little icon for lull, loaded it up, set it on autopilot. The computer made strange noises at the limit of human hearing. Names spoken faster than the ear could follow. Lifelessly now, running through by rote. That would change. I stood up, towering above the white frame of the computer. I placed my hand above it in a posture of benediction, like the Pope blessing a small child. Features in a beatific smile. I cleared my mind. In the background I could feel Anna's presence, telepathically bound to me, happy, radiant. I started. Rosela kafiluten mirakoi kalanyemi. Chana kaikai efsander galizdo tahun. Erica's voice from the hallway. Are you doing dark rituals in the bedroom again? If you burn that carpet, I swear, you can summon Thamiel himself, and all of his terrors will be as nothing compared to what I will put you through if... And I ended. Meh, 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 meh. My beloved is like a bit of information that flows in the system. kingjamesprogramming.tumblr.com. I remember the first time I met Anna Thurmond. I'd just been kicked out of Stanford. My mother was a wreck. I had to get away from her. I took the first minimum wage job I could find, a clerk position at Cash for Gold. It wasn't so bad. There was a sort of Kabbalah to it, freely interchanging symbols with material reality. I could respect that. I sat behind a register and studied Talmud and Zohar most of the day. And sometimes an elderly woman would come in to trade her jewelry for rather less than it was worth, and I would facilitate the transaction. Every so often I would get to a particularly interesting Talmudic tractate and stay past closing time. Sometimes I'd be there late into the night. It was a more congenial environment than my mother's apartment. Nobody noticed, and nobody cared. That was why I was still there at 11 or so one night when I heard a sort of commotion outside. I opened the door and caused a stunningly beautiful girl to fall off a stepladder. Euphemism, she said. I swear to God, she said euphemism. Are you okay? I asked. She was. She was holding 2 big yellow letters. I looked up at our sign. It was missing 2 big yellow letters. What do you think you're doing? I asked. I am bad at sounding threatening, but she was like 5'4", maybe 5'5", and also lying on the ground looking very ashamed, and so putting menace into my voice was easier than usual. Kabbalah, she said. I looked up at the sign again. It read, Cash or God. It's a Kabbalistic protest, she said faintly, against a society that thinks... You're not a Kabbalist. If you were a Kabbalist, you'd have more respect. You can't just go removing letters from signs like that. Matthew 5:18. Verily I say unto you, not a single letter, nor even a stroke of a letter, shall be removed until all is fulfilled. Oh, you want to go there? She caught her breath and stood back up. Matthew 16:4. This evil and adulterous generation wants a sign, but no sign shall be given to it. I blinked. Maybe she was a Kabbalist. But, I said, by removing the letter L, you make God out of gold. But the warning against idolatry in Exodus 20:23 says, you shall not make a god out of gold. But, said the girl, Exodus 25 says that you shall take gold and turn it unto the Lord. Now I was annoyed. You have taken an L and an F, I said. But if you map the Latin alphabet to Hebrew gematria, L and F sum to 26. The Tetragrammaton also has a gematria value of 26, so taking an L and an F is mystically equivalent to taking the name of God. But the third commandment is, you shall not take the name of God in vain. But the sound of L and F together, she said, is Aleph, and Aleph is silent and represents nothingness, so I have taken nothing. I heard the whine of a siren. Tell it to the cops, I said. She ran. She didn't even take the ladder. She just turned and ran away. It wasn't like I had even called the police. Just a coincidence, if you believe in such things.
For some reason, a cop with a siren was out there at 11 p.m. doing cop things, and she heard it and ran away. And I got to spend pretty much every waking moment over the next 6 months wondering who she was. I checked all of the universities with programs in Kabbalah, and I got nothing. No leads. As embarrassing as it was to ask, hey, does a pretty girl with blonde hair and a sort of bun who is really good at certain kinds of weird wordplay go here? I sucked it up and asked at Stanford, Berkeley, even Santa Clara, and I got nothing. I moved on to the yeshivas, even though most of them didn't even admit women. Nothing. It was a cold autumn night, and I just finished asking at what was absolutely positively the last yeshiva I was going to bother checking out, just as I thought I had the past several weekends.
One thing had led to another, and we had gotten into an argument about the creation of the universe. And finally, we agreed to take it to the bar, where I proceeded to repay their friendliness by sitting in a corner and not talking to anybody. I was only half paying attention when a girl walked up to one of the rabbinical students, told him he was pretty, and asked him to kiss her. It wasn't my girl. My girl was short and had blonde hair and a sort of bun and spoke way too fast. This was a tall girl with dark hair that looked like it had rejected a mohawk as too conformist and set forth with only an ox and a Conestoga wagon into new and exciting realms of weird hairstyles. The rabbinical student, a cherubic-faced young man with absolutely perfect curly hair, whose name I think was David, apologized and said that he was a rabbinical student and not big on kissing weird girls at bars whose hairstyles seemed to be inspired by the crests on species of extinct reptiles, or words to that effect. Wow, said the girl, a real rabbinical student. Tell you what, if I know something about the Bible that you don't know, will you kiss me? My ears perked up. You don't understand how heavily these people train. It's Torah 8 hours a day since they're old enough to sit up straight. They've got the thing memorized by now and then some. If you know something about the Bible I don't know, you can do whatever you want with me, David said, laughing. Said weird hair girl, and she made a show of thinking about it. I've got one. How long did Joseph spend in the belly of the whale? 3 days and 3 nights, he said practically instantly before I could warn him. Oh, so sorry, said weird hair girl. David looked at her. I can quote you chapter and verse, Jonah 1:17. Would be a lovely answer if I'd asked that. I asked you how long Joseph was in the belly of the whale. The rabbi trap had been sprung. His face turned red. He said. There's nothing in the Bible saying for sure that Joseph didn't spend time in a whale, too. Nope, said weird hair girl. I'm no rabbi, but I am pretty sure that zilch, nobody in the Bible spent time in a whale, except Jonah. And the wives of the men slain in Sennacherib's invasion of Jerusalem, I interjected, before I could stop myself. 2 sets of eyes suddenly pivoted my direction. The wives of the men slain in Sennacherib's invasion of Jerusalem, said David, did not spend time in a whale. Oh, they absolutely did, I said, because at this point I was in too deep to back out. They were very vocal about it. Weird hair girl raised one eyebrow. It's all in Byron, I said, then quoted, and the widows of Asher were loud in their wail. Blink, blink went the girl's eyes, then suddenly, I hate you and I hope you die. Then, wait, no, death would be too good for you. You need to meet my cousin. Then, drink. And she dragged me over to her table and shoved a beer at me. So when the thread of my memory resumes, late the next morning, I found myself lying in a strange bed, mostly naked.
I silently resolved not to go binge drinking with rabbinical students again. Wait. Standing over me as if scrutinizing a horse for purchase was Weird Hair Girl, and next to her, with precisely the same expression, was my short blonde girl with the pale blue eyes. The girl with the ladder.
He told a terrible whale joke, protested Weird Hair Girl. And first I wanted him to die, but then I realized that would be too good for him, and I told him he had to meet you instead.
What was the joke? Asked my blonde girl. It was... Weird Hair Girl thought for a second. Do you know how many beers I had last night, and you want me to remember things? Specific things? Said my blonde. She looked straight at me with the pale blue eyes. I don't think she recognized me. What was the joke? I protested. I don't even know where I am. I don't even know your names. In my head, I've been calling her Weird Hair Girl, and you... I cut myself off before I said something like the girl I'm going to marry. How am I supposed to remember a whale joke? The girl I was going to marry ran her fingers through her pale blonde hair in frustration and deep thought. Since you came up with it last night, she said, you must be able to come up with it again. You were with rabbinical students, therefore you were talking about the Bible, biblical whale jokes. What comes to mind? I said. Obviously, the biblical King Ahab isn't suspect, given his namesake. So, aha. Ahab was visiting Jerusalem, and he kept trying to shoot Moby Dick from there, but it's so far inland he couldn't reach the sea with his harpoon, so he ordered the construction of a great rampart to give him a height advantage. She stared at me. A calculating stare. And to this very day, it is known as the Wailing Wall, I finished, and both of us started giggling. Wait, said Weird Hair Girl. Why did I think introducing the two of you would be a good idea? This is the worst thing that ever happened. And then Ahab died and went to hell, she added, where there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth. But, I said, it was all in accordance with the wail of God. Wait, said the blonde. I've got one. Why was the sea so noisy after the destruction of Sennacherib's army? I thought for a second. Then I thought for another second. I got nothing, I said. Because, said the blonde girl, the widows of Asher were loud in their wail. Wait, no, that was it! That was my whale joke! I swear to God, that was my whale joke! This was the biggest mistake of my life, and I hope I die, said Weird Hair Girl. 2. I remember my first morning there, the morning it all came together. The girls finally dragged me out of bed and insisted on making me breakfast. Weird Hair Girl was named Erica. Girl whom I will someday marry was named Anna. Together they led me downstairs into an expansive dining room. Welcome to Ithaca, Anna told me as I sat down and plunked my head on the table, still a little hungover. You need food, Erica stated, and disappeared into the kitchen to fetch me some. Anna went with her. They were whispering to one another. Giggles may have been involved. It was a big house, a little old, but well-maintained. From one wall hung a sort of banner with a big Hebrew letter Yud on it, 10th letter of the alphabet, representing the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, with the obvious implications for capitalism and wealth accumulation. The big Yud was a Stevensite symbol. These were Stevensites. It fit. But I could do better than that. I turned my attention to the bookshelf on the far wall, tried to see what I could glean. They had the usual sci-fi/fantasy classics, Tolkien, Asimov, Salby, then some meteor fare, Zion T. the economist, Chetlock the prognosticator, Tetkowski the futurist, Yudka the novelist, good old calf Ben Clifford. I recognized a few I'd seen before by their covers alone. Nachman Bernstein's Divinity, Nachman Eritz's Alphonomics, Menelaus Molaman's Letter to the Open-Minded Atheist, Gibran and Eleazar's Kabbalah, A Modern Approach, Ben Aharon's Gematria Since Adam, Rachel Sephardi's Arriving at Aleph, Rav Kurzweil's The Age of Mechanized Spirituality, and, really, the collected works of Eliezer ben Moshe? I stared at the shelf greedily. I didn't have half of these. I hoped they weren't too serious about that not coveting. It was only after finishing my scan of the books that I turned to the other possible source of information in the room. Hi, I said to the guy sitting at the end of the table. He was tall and looked like he worked out. I'm Aaron Smith Teller. Nice to meet you. Brian Young, he said, barely looking up from his paper. Welcome to Ithaca. So I've heard. This is some kind of group house? You could say that, said Brian. Brian's the strong, silent type, said Anna, returning from the kitchen with coffee. She poured me a mug. It's why he and Erica get along so well. He never says anything, she never shuts up. Yes, we're a group house. Erica prefers the phrase commune. But Erica prefers lots of things. I'm standing right here making your food, Erica shouted from the kitchen. So are you guys some kind of Stevensite group, or? I started to ask. Anna put a finger to her mouth and whispered, "Shh, she'll hear you." Erica came in bearing 4 plates of toast. I'm glad you asked, she said in an inappropriately chirpy voice and
Picked Stevens' The Temple and the Marketplace off the shelf. Have you read this? The early years after the discovery of the first names had been a heady time, as would-be wizards had learned the few known incantations and built exciting new technologies on top of them. The luminous name had been worked into various prayers and magic squares and configurations to produce lights of dizzying shapes and colors. Clever inventors in self-funded workshops had incorporated the kinetic name into all sorts of little gadgets and doodads. The best Kabbalists had developed vast superstructures of prayers and made them available for free on the earliest computer networks to anyone who wanted to experiment. That ended with the founding of the great theonomic corporations. They gradually took over the applied Kabbalah scene in the 80s. Their grip tightened in the early 90s after the president and the Comet King worked together to create Unsong. Suddenly, every new name had a copyright attached to it, and the hundreds of lines of prayers and invocations people used to control the names and bend them to your will were proprietary material. The old workshops became less and less relevant. The old self-employed Kabbalist geniuses were either picked up to serve as drones at the theonomics or turned into increasingly irrelevant, bitter old men. It was in this atmosphere that Reverend Raymond E. Stevens of the Unitarian Church had written The Temple and the Marketplace. The book was 250 pages of sometimes excessively dense screeds, but it essentially argued that a whole host of biblical commandments, most notably, thou shalt not covet, and thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, were best interpreted as describing the divine names discovered after the sky cracked, prophetic injunctions intended to make sense only millennia after they were written. Taken together, these commandments formed a schematic for an ideal economy, the titular temple, in which the wealth-creating powers of the Kabbalah were shared by everyone. The modern world was ignoring God's plan in favor of unrestricted capitalism, the titular marketplace, and inviting terrible retribution upon themselves. Stevens saw himself as a modern-day Jeremiah, warning the Israelites to repent before they suffered the full force of God's vengeance. Despite being, by all accounts, something of a crackpot, his explanation of the dimensions of Solomon's temple as occult references to economic parameters reminds me of Newton's, only less lucid. He was in the right place at the right time. Stevenism spread among bitter old Kabbalists, teenage Marxist punks, spiritual but not religious hippies, and anyone who found themselves unexpectedly locked out of the new economy. It went from oddly specific theory to generic badge of the counterculture, and the same sort of people who spent the 60s talking about vibrations without really knowing what they meant, spent the 90s talking about the secret meanings of weird Levitical commandments. You guys are Unitarians? I asked. Stevens had been a Unitarian minister, and his work had spread like wildfire across the Unitarian community. After President Cheney cracked down on the church itself in the early part of the new millennium, what was left of Unitarianism was almost entirely Stevensite. Little religious communities built along the lines ordained by the reverend's books, singing the forbidden names of God during services. It was part prayer, part act of civil disobedience, and part military training. People who really knew the names tended to be bad people to mess with. We're the Unitarian hub, said Erica, for all of North San Jose. And I run the Bay Area Unitarian magazine, the Stevensite Standard. Listen. She stood on a chair and started giving what, from then on, I would always recognize as the spiel. The spiel was one of the few constants of life at Ithaca. Roommates would come and go. Intellectual fads would burst onto the scene in glorious bloom before vanishing in a puff of general embarrassment, but the spiel remained. Erica could do it convincingly while sober, but spectacularly when drunk. She'd converted entire bars full of people to her particular brand of radical theological anarchism on several occasions. Over years of practice, she had perfected it down to a 2-minute, 7-second elevator pitch, which she had so far recited in manners including blind drunk, on one foot, driving a motorcycle, and while having sex with 2 men at the same time.
The month I met her, she had been working on learning juggling, so she picked up 3 balls and began to orate. God is born free,
but everywhere is in chains. The names, our birthright as children of Adam, the patrimony which should have ensured us an age of plenty like none other in human history, have been stolen from us by corporations and hoard out to buy yachts
For billionaires. The fertile name brings forth grain from the earth, speeding the growth of crops by nearly half. Children in Ethiopia starve to death, and Ethiopian farmers cannot use the fertile name to grow the corn that would save them. Why not? Because Amalek holds the patent and demands $800 up front from any farmer who wants to take advantage of it. The purifying name instantly kills 18 species of harmful bacteria, including 2 that are resistant to all but the most toxic antibiotics. But 2/3 of American hospitals have no one licensed to use the purifying name. Why not? Because they can't afford the licensing fees demanded by Gog Magog. In the old days, we told ourselves that poverty was a fact of life, that there wasn't enough food or medicine or clothing or housing
To go around. Then it was true. Now it is false. To feed the hungry or heal the sick no longer requires scarce resources. It requires only a word that the entire international system of governance corporations, politicians, Unsong, has united to prevent the needy from ever obtaining. 86% of known names are held by 7 big core. Damn! Erica had dropped her balls. She picked them back up, then continued. 86% of known names are held by 7 big theonomic corporations: Microprosopis, Gog-Magog, Amalek, Countenance, Tetragrammaton, Elishon, and Serpens the biggest with $174 billion in assets. Its CEO has a net worth of $9 billion, 5 beach houses scattered across the untied states, and her own private 12-seater jet. When Marx heard of such injustices, he demanded we seize the means of production.
But today, the means of production aren't factories to be seized by mobs with pitchforks. They're names, to be taken in spiritual struggle and spread around the world until the system is seen for the sham it really is and crumbles of its own accord. Thus, William Blake, I will not cease from mental fight, nor let my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. And the theonomic corporations will stop at nothing to thwart us, Erica warned. The Clipot are... I know what they are, I interrupted. I was expelled from Stanford for publishing a method for breaking Clipot. Erica dropped her balls, then fell off her chair. Name! She shouted. I knew you seemed familiar. I organized a protest for you. 2 years ago, I'd been exactly where I wanted to be. A Stanford undergrad studying the applied Kabbalah on a nice scholarship. I'd just finished a class on Clipot and was playing around a bit. In the theoretical Kabbalah, Clipot are these sort of demonic scleroses that encrust the divine light and make it inaccessible. But in the applied Kabbalah, the word is used to describe cryptographic transformations of the names of God that allow them to be used without revealing them to listeners. Imagine you've discovered a name that lets you cure cancer, and you want to cure a customer's cancer but don't want them to learn the name themselves so they can steal your business. Instead of speaking the name aloud, you apply a cipher to it. If you want, change all the A's to E's and all the B's to Z's, so that Abba becomes Izzy, and speak the cipher while holding the original fixed in your mind. The name has the desired effect, and your ungrateful customer is left with nothing but the meaningless word Ezzy, which absent the plaintext version is of no use to anybody. Problem is, all the names follow certain numerological rules. The Maharaj rankings are the most famous, but there are over a dozen. So by working backwards from a klipa, it's usually possible to narrow down the plaintext name to a very small collection of possibilities, which you can then check by hand, or by mouth, as the case may be. You end up with a race between rights holders of names trying to develop better and better klipa, and everyone else trying to discover better and better ways of breaking them. Well, I joined Team Everyone Else in college and came up with a pretty nifty new algorithm for breaking Neomyth, one of the big Clipot used by the Gog-Magog Corporation, with about 1% as much hassle as anyone else had come up with. My advisor told me not to publish, and I ignored him. Turned out giant evil corporations don't like having their multi-billion-dollar properties rendered useless. Nothing I'd done was illegal per se, but they put pressure on Stanford to expel me. Expel me they did, and a few months later their Applied Kabbalah department had a new professorship endowed with Gog-Magog money, and I was broke and living with my mother. Not that I'm bitter. Yeah, I said half-heartedly. Thanks. You, said Erica, you need to join us. You're like a real-life freedom fighter. A martyr, like the Israelites at Masada. You fought the law. And the law won, I said. Did Anna tell you where she found me? An old cash for gold shop on Briar Street? Erica was barely listening. You're a hero in the battle against tyranny. And a Kabbalist. We need Kabbalists. Right now, Anna is leading the choir, but she's an amateur. You're a professional. You need to join us. Brian is moving out in a few weeks. There will be a room opening up. I rolled my eyes at the hero part, then the battle against tyranny part, and a third time at me being a professional anything, until it looked like I had some kind of weird eye movement disorder. I stopped when I heard room opening up. How much is rent? I asked. Oh ho, said Erica, suddenly interest. A brief flurry of awkward glances between Anna and Erica and occasionally Brian, who refused to return any of them and continued reading the paper. Finally, Erica spoke. $500 a month, she said. I stared her in the eyes. What's the catch? This was the Bay Area. A rat-infested hovel went into the 4 digits. Said Anna. Erica finished her sentence. Anna's family is very wealthy and has kindly, albeit unknowingly, offered to subsidize the rest of us. Unknowingly? I asked. I'm a grad student at Stanford, said Anna, and I tell them I need the money for room and board. How much? I asked. A few thousand. And they believe you? Well, it is the Bay Area. She had a point. My mind added, beautiful and witty and rich. 3. I remember the day I first saw Anna in her element. She was studying at Stanford. I'd checked Stanford when I was looking for her, but I'd checked the wrong place. She wasn't studying the Kabbalah per se. She was a grad student in philosophy. Her area was theodicy, the question of how a perfectly good God can allow a universe filled with so much that is evil. Who even studies theodicy anymore? After 2,000 years of hand-wringing, what's left to say? There must have been something because journals kept publishing Anna's work. And a few months before I met her, she was named the Augustin Distinguished Scholar in Theodicy, apparently a big national honor that came with a heap of money. It was her passion, her great love, her reason for being. Don't you get it, Aaron? She would say, animated almost to the point of mania. We're looking at all of this the wrong way. The divine names, the laws of physics. We're asking what when we should be asking why. Why did God create the universe the way he did? Why the names? If we really understand God's goodness, then we can predict everything. What will the stock market do next year? Whatever it's best for it to do. Who will win the next presidential election? Whichever candidate is better. If we really understood divine goodness, we would understand everything past, present, and future. I gingerly pointed out that the world was terrible. That's exactly the thing, Anna said. How do we square our knowledge that God wants as good a universe as possible with the terrible universe we ended up with? Square that circle, and literally everything else falls into place. Every Sunday night, Erica hosted a dinner party. Every Sunday night, one guest was tasked with giving a presentation. Something they were interested in. Something to keep us entertained while we waited for the food to be ready. A few weeks ago, Erica herself had talked about running the Standard and how she was going to get distribution networks going across the California Republic and maybe even into the Salish Free State. The week before, I'd talked about a new paper out of MIT expanding upon Rubinstein's sieve, one of the most important methods for narrowing down namespace. Now it was Anna's turn, and of course she was going to talk about the Book of Job. The chairs were all full as usual. I recognized Bill Dodd. He'd been a physics grad student at Berkeley before ending as one of the washed-up scientists who seemed to be everywhere in the Bay these days, the type instantly recognizable by their tendency to respond to things which were none of their business, with, as a physicist, I think, I recognize Elliot Eli Foss. Calm, quiet. Elliot. Erica had picked him up at a Unitarian meeting in Oakland. Picked him up in both senses of the word. Well, 2 of the 3, she hadn't literally lifted him. Rumor had it that he was actually religious instead of meta-ironically religious, but no one could tell for certain, and the whole idea made us sort of uncomfortable. I recognized Allie who was smiling awkwardly and talking to Elliot in her crisp, overly enunciated English. Her family had been bigwigs in the harmonious Jade Dragon Empire before the latest round of purges. They'd fled to California, and now they owned half of southern Santa Clara Valley. Allie had only been on this side of the world 6 or 7 years, but had already fallen in with a bad crowd, namely us. The doorbell rang, and I answered it. I recognized Zoe Farr. She was in a tight pink t-shirt with a big Ute on it. Karen Happick from the North Bay had been selling them at cost a couple of months ago. I think I had a white one at the bottom of a drawer, unworn. "You're late," Erica told her. There was no malice in her voice, only confusion that someone might risk missing her cooking. She'd poured blood and sweat and tears into building our little community, but the secret ingredient had turned out to be soup. She was a really good cook, and what her magazine and occasional impassioned speeches couldn't do, an invitation to one of her dinner parties might. It was weird, the way little things like that turn the wheels of destiny. I've always wondered if history is missing some story, like how the Founding Fathers only declared independence because Martha Washington served amazing stew every time there was a Continental Congress. I sat back down. The conversation had shifted. Bill was asking Allie why the house was called Ithaca. Allie was giggling and saying she was sworn to secrecy. The chair next to me was empty. The doorbell rang again. I opened the door again. "Hello," said Pirindiel, ducking and fidgeting awkwardly to fit his tall winged form through the door. "I'm here. I brought you an offering." He held out a bouquet of extremely dead flowers. I shot Erica a look, which I hoped encoded, "You invited a fallen angel to the dinner party? Really?" She shot a look back, which I interpreted as, "Well, he's part of the cause, and he probably doesn't get out much, and also, shut up." "When did you get those flowers?" asked Erica patiently. "A month ago," said Pirindiel, "the day you invited me. I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget." "You do remember," asked Erica, "that flowers wilt after being dead for too long?" Pirindiel's face fell. It was obvious that he'd forgotten. Erica shot me "Don't shoot me any" look, so I didn't. Fallen angels were always forgetting little things like the tendency of earthly life to decay and die. Or wondering why the news today was different than the news 6 months ago. Or being surprised again and again when people turned out to be not very nice. It was why they were usually complete wrecks. Anna was actually the last to arrive, even though she lived here. She looked ethereally beautiful as she descended the staircase, a bag of books in her hand. She reached the table, sat down beside me, started passing out books, one per person. "Fellow singers, the Book of Job." There weren't enough copies of the Book of Job for all of us, which was either a metaphor or bad planning on Anna's part. Pirindiel knew it by memory, which made things a little easier, and Erica was still at the stove preparing the main course, but I still ended up sharing a copy with Allie. "The Book of Job," said Anna. She had the voice of a singer, lowercase s, though as far as I knew, she'd never had any vocal training. When she spoke, people listened. Totally unique among biblical manuscripts. It's not set in Israel, but in maybe somewhere in Arabia. It probably predates Israel as a settled state. It's written in a much older form of Hebrew than any other biblical book. It gets quoted in Isaiah, which means it's older than the prophets. It gets quoted in Psalms, which means it's older than King David. The lexicon is totally different, so many foreign words that scholars suspect it was written in something else, and translated later on, so maybe older than the Hebrew language itself. This thing is old, and there's one other difference between Job and the rest of the Bible. Job it's self-aware. It takes these questions that we all want to ask, reading the rest of the Bible. If God is good and all-powerful, how come there's so much evil in the world? And instead of ignoring them, it runs into them head-on. Like, haven't you ever read the Bible and had questions and wish you could just ask them to God directly? Job is the book where someone actually does that. Anna's enthusiasm wasn't exactly infectious, but it was honest. You didn't always become interested in what Anna was talking about, but it was hard not to become interested in Anna. But it's also the greatest disappointment in the history of literature. You have this framed story where the very righteous man Job falls on hard times, and he asks his friends why this is happening to him, and his friends say that surely bad things never happen to good people, so Job must have done something wrong. Job insists that he hasn't, and he's right. In fact, later, God's going to command that the friends sacrifice various animals to atone for besmirching Job's name in this way. Job is just a really, really righteous guy who suffers an immense amount. And finally, we get to the climax, where Job demands an answer. And God appears in the whirlwind, and we think we're finally going to get to hear the official, biblically approved answer to this problem, at the heart of religion and human existence. And God just says, well, open your books. Anna took a deep breath in, and although she was short and adorable, she did her best to speak in the booming voice of God. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding, who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened, or who laid the cornerstone thereof, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? She went on in this vein. We listened. One thing Anna hadn't mentioned about Job is that it was spectacular poetry. We tend to think of the Bible as a bunch of boring begats, but Job dazzles beyond our wildest expectations. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings, that they may go and say unto thee, Here we are? As a physicist, said Bildad, I feel obligated to say that we can send lightnings. All you need is something that produces a high enough voltage, like a big Van der Graaf generator. Anna turned to Bill, with fire in her eyes. Her God impression was getting scarily on point. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Sheesh, said Alihu, who was reading ahead in our shared copy. God is so obsessed with this whole Leviathan thing. First he is talking about the earth and the stars and the clouds, and then he decides, no, I will just drop everything and focus on Leviathan for 3 chapters. God is canonically really obsessed with Leviathan, I said. In the Talmud, Rav Yehuda says that there are 12 hours in a day.
God spends 3 of them studying Torah, 3 judging the world, 3 answering prayers, and 3 playing with Leviathan. That's a quarter of God's time, which you have to imagine is pretty valuable. Everyone looked at me. I shrugged.
The Talmud is kind of crazy. You know, said Bildad, what is Leviathan anyway? Like a giant whale or something, right? So God is saying we need to be able to make whales submit to us and serve us and dance for us and stuff? 'Cause I've been to SeaWorld. We have totally done that. Leviathan is a giant sea dinosaur thing, said Zoe Farr. Like a plesiosaur. Look, it's in the next chapter. It says he has scales and a strong neck. And you don't think if he really existed, we'd Jurassic Park the sucker? Asked Bildad. It also says he breathes fire, said Eli Foss. So, proposed Erica, if we can find a fire-breathing whale with scales and a neck and we bring it to SeaWorld, then we win the Bible? What I think my esteemed cousin meant to say, Anna said cheerfully, dropping the God act, is that God argues here that we're too weak and ignorant to be worthy to know these things. But then the question becomes, exactly how smart do we have to be to deserve an answer? Now that we can, as Bill puts it, send lightning through the sky, now that we can capture whales and make them do tricks for us, does that mean we have a right to ask God for an explanation? Discuss. Maybe, said Alihu, God does not say that we are not worthy. Maybe God says that we can't understand, that we are maybe not smart enough. But, said Eli Foss, when kids aren't smart enough to understand something, we give them the simple explanation. Like when kids ask about lightning, we say that the clouds rub up against each other and make sparks. It's not totally right, but it's better than nothing. Erica stood up tall, doing her best impression of an overbearing mother. Who darkeneth counsel with words without knowledge? Canst thou graduate college? Canst thou go unto the office and bring back $40,000 a year? When the dishwasher breaketh, is it thou who repairest it? Everybody laughed, except Pirindiel, who muttered something like, Do parents really talk that way?
My doctor talks that way, said Zoe Farr. Whenever I question him about something, he just looks at me and says in this voice, Which one of us went to medical school? The Book of Job actually makes a hell of a lot of sense if you suppose God is a doctor, Erica agreed. And, Zoe Farr added, it would explain why doctors think they're God. Seriously, said Anna, who does that? Other than doctors, I mean. Job is asking this very reasonable question. How come I, a righteous man, have been made to suffer immensely? God actually knows the answer. It's because he wanted to win a bet with Satan. But instead of telling Job that, he spends like 3 entire chapters rubbing in the fact that he's omnipotent, and Job isn't. Why would you do that? The part with the Satan is weird, said Alihu. If really this is God's reason, then the reason for Job's suffering is different from the reason for everyone else's suffering, right? Bad things happen to most people, but maybe it is not because of bet between God and Satan at all times. Girl's got a point, said Bildad. I remembered, Alihu continued, when we left of the harmonious Jade Dragon Empire. I keep asking my parents, what is happening? Where do we go? Because I was young. They say, we're going to a vacation, and I say, but why are we going to a vacation during school time? Then they got very angry with me, and told me I should mind my own beehive. Beeswax, Bildad corrected. But they were trying to protect me. They knew if I hear the real answer, I would start crying, become upset, maybe run away. Maybe the real reason God allows evil is something terrible. Maybe he is trying to protect us from knowing something. Everyone was quiet for a second. In the Talmud, said Eli Foss, Rabbi Akiva says that apparent evil is always for a greater good. For example, he tells the story of the time when he was traveling to a town, and no one would let him stay in the inn, so he tried to camp in the woods. But his fire went out, and he was alone in the cold and the darkness. But that night, a bunch of bandits raided the town and killed and enslaved everybody. If Akiva had been staying in the inn, or if he'd had a fire burning, they would have found him and killed him. That's stupid, said Erica. God could just make there not be bandits. Yes, sometimes some suffering is necessary to prevent even greater suffering, but then you ask why there has to be the greater suffering. And if you keep pushing it back further, then eventually you get to the greatest suffering of all, and the buck stops there. In a different part of the Talmud, I said, Rabbi Akiva gives a different explanation. He says that even the heaven-bound righteous have a few sins. And since those sins won't be punished in heaven, they have to be punished here on earth. Therefore, the righteous suffer on earth. But even the hell-bound wicked have a few virtues. And since those virtues won't be rewarded in hell, they have to be rewarded here on earth. Therefore, the wicked prosper on earth. Then people ask why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, and it looks like a mystery. But it actually makes total sense. As a physicist, said Bildad, I would think you could model that as a bimodal distribution of suffering. But instead, intuitively, there's more of a normal distribution of suffering. And although people complain that the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer, there's not a perfect correlation. I don't even know if there's a correlation at all. It seems more like suffering happens at random, regardless of how good a person you are. I was raised Catholic, said Zoe Farr. In church school, we always learned that evil is just the absence of good. So God didn't create evil. He just created a finite and limited amount of good, not always as much as we'd like. So people aren't as nice as they could be. And sometimes the weather forms storms and tornadoes. But it's not because there's this active force called evil out there. It's just because the weather is doing its own thing, unrestrained by God pouring infinite amounts of good into it. No, said Anna forcefully, abandoning her role as referee and joining in the discussion. That's not right. There are certainly bad people who just fulfill their natural selfishness without having any good to get in the way. The bankers, CEOs of theonomics, Unsong agents, cops, politicians. They just do what the system tells them. Follow their incentives with no concern for the consequences. But then, there are other people. Your sadists, your serial killers. People who delight in causing other people pain. Ally Weasel said the opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. I beg to differ. Any of you ever read about what the Japanese did to the Chinese in Nanking? The Nazis, mostly they just wanted some people dead and went about it in a horrifically efficient way. The Japanese, they enjoyed it. They worked hard on it. They deviated from efficiency, from self-interest. They sacrificed their own self-interest to be as perfectly cruel as possible.
And hell, Thamiel and his demons, they're not indifferent. They're evil. There's a difference. I mean, it looks like there's a difference to us, said Zoe Farr. But maybe on a metaphysical level, that sort of depravity is just what a total, absolute absence of good looks like. I remember seeing a video, said Anna, of the president's summit with the devil. It was in this big hall. First the president came in, and they all played the Star-Spangled Banner. Then Thamiel came in, and the band played the anthem of hell. It was horrible. I didn't even know instruments could make noises like that.
They were all out of tune and fighting with each other and going at weird intervals that tricked the ear and made me want to pull my hair out. So? Asked Zoe. Maybe the hell music was just the total absolute absence of good in music.
No, said Anna. There's good music, and then there's total silence. And then there's that. It's not silence, it's the opposite of music.
Unsong, I suggested. Everyone except Anna laughed. Yes, she said, unsong. Garlic angel hair, Erica said at that moment, and brought a big pot of pasta to the table. Everyone made approving noises except Perindiel, who asked something about where one could find these garlic angels, and who had to be taken aside and given a quick explanation. The angel took some pasta and half-heartedly put it in his cup of soup. The reason I bring all of this up, said Anna in between mouthfuls, is that here we are. We're Unitarians and singers. We've got a movement. We think we're on the side of good. We know it's evil. Evil is when Unsong and the Theonomics try to control the names of God and keep them from the people. We think we know what we have to do. We have to take up Reverend Stevens's crusade and spread the names to as many people as possible. On a political level, this all makes sense, but on a theological level, even Reverend Stevens barely touched this. Why does God have these names that work miracles, but not tell us what they are? Why does he suffer them to be distributed throughout a namespace that can only be searched through a combination of cryptological acumen and brute force? Why does he permit them to be hidden by clipot, by which they can be bought and sold without letting the customer grasp their true structure? Why would he create enough magic to make the world a paradise for all living things, then place it somewhere it can be kept in a locked vault to enrich the few? Why, as the Bible put it, does he hide his light under a bushel? Seems clear enough to me, said Bill Dodd. God's not a big guy in the sky. He's just a force, like physical forces, but on a higher level. He doesn't plan these things any more than anyone plans gravity. It just happens. So you're denying the Bible, Eli Foss said, somewhat less intimidating than intended due to a mouthful of pasta. We're sitting here at a table with an angel and a Kabbalist, and you're denying the Bible? Look, we all know that the Bible was given by Uriel, not God. Most of it just records Uriel's interventions in the world, which are usually well-intentioned, but certainly not omniscient. Why not the book of Job, too? Job asks a hard question and gets yelled at. Sounds exactly like Uriel on a bad day. I can even imagine him going on about the Leviathan for like an hour, describing how interesting he finds each of its fins and teeth and things, while Job gets more and more confused. A couple of people snorted. But Uriel, said Eli Foss, has always said he's just trying to follow God's plan as he understands it. The Pope says the same thing, said Bill Dodd. That doesn't mean he's met the guy. Someone must have created the world, protested Alihu, and all the angels and the names and the Kabbalah. I'm not saying there's not a creator force, said Bill Dodd. I'm just saying it shouldn't be thought of as a person. Thomas Aquinas, said Zoe Farr, tells us that God is not a person, not at all, not even close, but can sometimes be compared to one. Since a person is the most intelligent entity we have to compare it to. It's like how they used to say, the brain was a telephone switchboard. It's much more than that, but if all you have as a metaphor is a telephone switchboard, it's better than nothing. But if God can't even figure out, said Bill Dodd, that if you want perfect good, you should avoid having evil, well, whatever it is he is, it's got to be kind of dumb. Oh, said Pirandil, and there was worry in his eyes. You shouldn't say that.
That's blasphemy. Be nice, Bill, said Anna. There are angels here. I feel like we're forgetting something pretty important, said Erica. I hate to go all dualist here, but we know there's a hell. We know there's a devil. I'm not saying that God and the devil are exactly equally powerful, but maybe it's not quite so one-sided that God can just steamroll over Tamil without a second thought. Maybe there's some kind of strategic balance thing going on. Anna looked shocked. Perindial looked horrified, but it was Eli Foss who spoke first. Erica, he said, God is one. That's the whole point. You can't just go around saying there are two separate beings with similar levels of godlike power. That's like saying there are two gods. It's serious, serious blasphemy. Well, said Erica, maybe if God didn't want people saying the devil's just as powerful as he is, he should stop making the world full of evil just as much as good. Maybe if he didn't want us saying he's too weak to save everyone who's sick or suffering or in hell, he should get off his cosmic ass and save them. When Anna spoke now, it was very serious. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that thou mayest be righteous? Huh, I exclaimed. Everyone looked at me. That verse from the Rubaiyat, the one Nixon used in the 70s, it goes, O thou, who burns with tears for those who burn in hell, whose fires will find thee in thy turn, hope not the Lord thy God to mercy teach. For who art thou to teach, or he to learn? That's from Job. It's got to be. Khayyam must have read Job. Well, said Zoe, it certainly got the right amount of condescension. What are we talking about? Asked Perindial. Hast thou an arm like God? Anna recited. Or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Okay, said Bildad. We get the idea. Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Is somebody saying there are two gods? Asked Perindial. Because God is one. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold everyone that is proud, and abase him. Okay, said Alihu, that's enough. She grabbed the book of Job from Anna's hands. Anna grabbed it back, a tug of war. Dessert's ready, said Erica. God is one and his name is one, insisted Perindial. This is very important. It's devil's food cake, Erica said, bringing the plate to the table. No! Perindial shouted at Erica and her cake, and in a flash he was on his feet, sword of fire materializing in his hands, rushing towards her. Allie pulled the book away from Anna. This is not how we do theodicy in this house, I shouted at Allie and Anna. Help, shouted Anna. Immigrants are stealing my job. Wait, said Bildad, I just got it. The house is called Ithaca because it's where theodicy happens. Fuck. It's just dessert, Erica screamed at the oncoming Perindial. No, Anna shouted. That's the whole point of Job. There are no just deserts. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my scroll wheel, and activated the thunderclap name. A deafening boom filled the room. Everybody went silent. Thanks, Aaron, Erica said, defeated. Everyone sit down, I said. Perindial, sword away. No more theodicy. Time for dessert. I-4. I remember the day I asked Anna on a date. It was my 3rd week in Ithaca. I just finished moving my bed into my room with the help of one of the other group home residents, a tall Asian guy who didn't like to talk very much. I was sweaty and thirsty. I'd gone into the common room to drink some Gatorade, and found Anna already there reading a book. We'd started talking, and somehow gotten onto the subject of the Shem HaMepharash, the explicit name of God, the true name, the most holy name, which gave its wielder power over all creation. The explicit name is Harold, I told her. No, she answered. The explicit name is Juan. But, I said, in the Lord's Prayer we say, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. But, Anna objected, in the Shema we say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is Juan. But, I said, all angels are angels of the Lord, and the song says, Hark, the herald angels sing. But, Anna objected, the Elinuen's God is Juan, and his name is Juan. But, I said, Christians say Jesus is God, and they give his name as Jesus H. Christ. What might the H stand for? Herald. But, Anna objected, think about it. Who names their kids Jesus? Mexican people, that's who. And what kind of names do Mexican people have? Names like Juan. Q period, E period, D period. She actually said Q period, E period, D period. I felt a wave of affection crash over me and through me, stronger than any other I had ever known. Before my frontal lobes could push through a veto, I blurted out, "Anna, would you go on a date with me?" Anna's face fell. "Aaron," she said, "I'm asexual." "So?" I said. "I asked you for a date, not for sex." "Still, if we went on a date, we would be talking and enjoying each other's company. That's what we're doing now. So what's the problem?" "If not being on a date is exactly the same as being on a date, why do you want to go on a date? Why don't we stay here, in the living room?" "Hey, that's not fair. Human attraction never is." "Well, it should be." Anna rolled her eyes. "You realize you're talking to the Augustine Distinguished Scholar in Theodicy? The girl who picketed in front of the World's Fair back in 2012, waving a sign saying, 'No, it isn't'? You're preaching to the euphemism inquire." I was briefly discombobulated, then regained my combobulation. "Look," I said, "I really like you. I want you to like me back. Dates are like a universally recognized signal of this. What if I just told you outright that I liked you? I want it to be official. I could give you a certificate. I have an uncle who's a notary public. We could make him sign." I choked back a tear. "Anna, this is serious." Her expression changed. "I'm serious too," she said. "I like you. You're funny and interesting and you know the mystical secrets of Juan. But everything around romance, the flowers, the silly looks, the candlelight dinners, I'm not into these things. I'm happy to talk with you, to live with you, even to grab dinner with you if you're hungry, but I don't want a date. If you're going to grab dinner, why not call it a date? It's just a word." She shut her book with great force. "Did you really say just a word? You call yourself a Kabbalist. Words have power. Words are the only tools we have to connect to the highest levels of our intellect."
To the mysteries of reality. Once we describe something with a word, things happen. It's been given a life of its own. The angels are on notice, working their secret little works around it, starting reverberations that
Echo across the entire structure. Words are the vestment of divinity, the innermost garments of Juan. I just sat there and took it. I didn't say anything, because I was on the verge of tears, and if I spoke she would have noticed. And then I would have looked dumb, and she would have lost respect for me or something. Look, it sounds stupid when I write it down, but give me a break. I sat there silently, did not disturb Juan's innermost garments with my speech. Anna realized something was wrong. She said, "If it helps, I am totally okay with you writing me flowery love poetry." "It helps a little," I said. "And, tell you what, Erica's in the kitchen making curry. If you can eat one of the habanero peppers whole, without drinking water for a whole minute, I'll give you a kiss." "Really?" I asked, and leapt to my feet, because I was a moron. And I remember the day Anna and I got married. It was towards the end of my first month at Ithaca. I'd just been let go from my job at Cash for Gold, and I was working on my application for countenance. Erica was making curry, and because she was a terrible person who enjoyed making me miserable, she asked if I wanted another whole habanero. I winced and clutched my throat just thinking about it, then very politely told her no, in a way that might possibly have referenced Dante and the many terrors of the damned. She laughed. "I'll be honest," she said. "Nobody else has ever had the guts to eat one of those. What were you thinking?" "I wanted to impress Anna," I said. I looked towards Anna, who was sitting at the table, scanning for offense. None was found. "I have a crush on her, and it was getting awkward, so she tricked me into eating a chili pepper to disengage myself from the situation." Then, feeling guilty about my elision, I told her the whole story. Erica looked delighted. "You're in love with my cousin," she announced to no one in particular. She's not interested," I said glumly. Erica took this information in, chewed it over for a moment, then, "Wait, I've got it. You should get married." I rolled my eyes. She won't even. "Wait," said Anna. "Yes, Erica, you're brilliant." Confusion ensued. "You won't go on a date with me, but you will marry me? How does that even—" Anna was gone, a dash up the stairs. A few seconds later, she returned with a notebook. "Okay," she said. "So, a while ago I was thinking, Aaron, you'll like this. You know how there have been later additions to the Bible, like the end of Mark 16 or the part in John 7? 8? And Kabbalists have mostly ignored those, first of all, out of totally unjustified prejudice against the New Testament, and second of all because, well, if they were added in by later readers, they can't metaphorically represent the secret structure of the universe. But I thought, what if the later additions to the Bible metaphorically represent later additions to the secret structure of the universe? So I ran a couple of them through Rubinstein's sieve and normalized the results, divided the whole thing by Aleph Tet Nun as the most appropriate Boston triplet. And sure enough, I got 5 subfactors, one of which gets the right Maharaj rank for a potential name. After like a week of trying, I was able to free it from a relatively weak klippa. You discovered a name? I asked. Not more than a dozen Kabbalists alive had discovered names the old-fashioned way, the proper way, by genius alone. It was total luck, she insisted. And nobody else was crazy enough to look in the editions. Well, I asked, buzzing with excitement, what does it do? Unclear, said Anna. It marries people, said Erica. Sort of, said Anna. Sacred Kabbalistic marriage of minds, said Erica. Scab mom for short, said Anna. But I haven't gotten it to work quite right yet. She described the moment of discovery, tasting the new name, pregnant with possibilities, the feel of the name itself entering her brain, unlocking secret wisdom, a ritual, certain words. She'd grabbed Erica from the kitchen over her protests and dragged her into her bedroom, where she had arranged 4 candles in an approximate square. Around the perimeter of the square, she'd sprinkled colored sand in the shape of Hebrew letters. 10 colors, 22 letters per side. Love of God, we just had those carpets cleaned, Erica objected. I hope for your sake you're able to get all of that out with the vacuum. Shh, said Anna. Repeat after me, but change the names. Hi, Anna Thurmond. I, Erica Lowry, in full knowledge of the consequences, call upon the symbols and angels of the world. Wait, what are the consequences? Shh, this is just a test. Now we've got to start over. I, Anna Thurmond, I, Erica Lowry, in full knowledge of the consequences, call upon the symbols and angels of the world in full knowledge of the consequences, call upon the symbols and angels of the world. The higher and the lower spheres, the higher and the lower spheres, and the master of them all, and the master of them all, to join us at the root as mountains to the earth, to join us at the root as mountains to the earth, and rivers to the ocean,
and rivers to the ocean, and stars to the firmament, and stars to the firmament. And so we invoke the holy name, Yarna Avante Shoktean Milevanza None Keth Ulat. And so we invoke the holy name, Yarna Avante Shoktehan, my, Levan, no wait, None Keth Ulat. Here the candles start to darken. For God is one, for God is one, and his name is one, and his name is one, and we are one, and we are one, and it is done, and it is done. Then all the letters of colored sand glowed red, then green, then white, and the candles laid round made a high-pitched sound and flared up in a burst of light. And Erica screams, and Anna seems to be gazing far away, and she briefly fits, but she gathers her wits just in time to hear her say, Anna, look, the letters have burned themselves into the carpet. You are in so much trouble. How do you feel? Anna asked. Angry, said Erica. Other than that, Anna asked. Nothing else can get through the hot flames of my anger, Erica protested. I don't feel any different either. But, Anna told me, over the next couple of weeks we would get these intimations from each other. Like I would be on one side of the house, and I would feel like something was wrong. And I'd go find Erica, and she would have just burned herself by accident. Or I'd be feeling really sad about something, and Erica would say, You look sad, even though I wasn't showing it at all. Great, I said. You're like those people who say they have psychic powers on TV. Maybe one day the phone will ring, and you'll know who's calling before you pick it up. Spooky. I don't think we did it right, said Anna. We weren't the right people. I could feel the inadequacies in the ritual. And I've been thinking, this is biblical stuff. So maybe the marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman. Or at least 2 people who aren't cousins, Erica suggested. No, said Anna. The Bible is totally in favor of marrying cousins. Esau married his cousin. Jacob married both of his cousins. But, I said, your name came from some sort of later edition and was in the New Testament to boot. Maybe it's a product of a more sophisticated age. Said Anna,
Then, "I'll get the colored sand! You do it outside this time!" Erica insisted. And so it was only about a half hour later, after numerous fits and starts due to the sand blowing away in the wind, that the two of us stood amidst the candles and spoke the holy name, Yerna Avante Shoktehan Milevanza Naoneketh Ulat, and Anna said, "And God is one." And I answered, "And God is one, and his name is one, and his name is one, and we are one, and we are one. And it is done, and it is done." We stared into each other's eyes for a moment after that. What we were looking for, I don't know. Looking back, I think I secretly hoped that it would fill her with love for me. What she hoped, if anything, I don't know. But we stared at each other for a while, and finally Anna said, "Wait." "Think something at me." And I thought, Ruth and Bowhead. Holy euphemism, the first thing ever in history communicated telepathically, and it's one of your stupid biblical whale puns. That wasn't even a good one. I am so done with this. And I thought, Shamu Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Oh, stop. Why did I give you the ability to communicate with me telepathically? Why? Why? What's that thing Erica always says? Oh, right. This was the biggest mistake of my life, and I hope I die. Those who speak the names of God aloud are called cantors and singers. Like everything, these terms have both overt and Kabbalistic meanings. The overt meaning of cantor is someone who chants. The Kabbalistic meaning is someone who works with infinity. This reading we derive from Georg Cantor, the German mathematician who explored the cardinality of infinite sets. He found that though the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on, were infinite,
still there were fewer of them than there were real numbers like root 2 pi and 0.2395679900052. Indeed, not only were there two different levels of infinity, but it seemed likely that there were an infinite number of different infinities, and maybe one extra. To describe the number of infinities there were, the overall effect on him was much like the man in the limerick. There once was a fellow from Trinity who took the square root of infinity, but the number of digits quite gave him the fidgets, and he dropped math and took up divinity. Cantor began talking about how his discoveries were direct and personal revelations from God, who wished him to preach the gospel of infinity so that an infinite deity could be better understood. He posited an absolute infinite, beyond all the forms of infinity he had discovered, with which God might be identified. Finally, he declared, "I have never proceeded from any genus supremum of the actual infinite. Quite the contrary, I have rigorously proved that there is absolutely no genus supremum of the actual infinite. What surpasses all that is finite and transfinite is no genus. It is the single, completely individual unity in which everything is included, which includes the absolute, incomprehensible to the human understanding."
This is the actus purissimus, which by many is called God. When he finally made his discoveries public, he chose a curious notation. It has seemed to me for many years indispensable to fix the transfinite powers or cardinal numbers by some symbol, and after much wavering to and fro, I have called upon the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. The usual alphabet seemed to me too much use to be fitted for this purpose. On the other hand, I didn't want to invent a new sign. A pragmatic account, utterly without reference to a 2,000-year-old tradition of using the Aleph to signify God. Nothing is ever a coincidence. The genealogies say his grandparents were Sephardic Jews, and if they weren't Kabbalists, I will eat my hat. The overt meaning of singer is someone who sings. The Kabbalistic meaning is someone who tries to be good. This reading we derive from Peter Singer, an Australian philosopher who explored the depths of moral obligation. He imagined a man in a very nice coat walking by a pond. In the pond, he sees a young child drowning, screaming for help. The man is quite a good swimmer and could easily save the child, but his nice coat would be ruined and would cost him $100 to replace. He decides he doesn't want to ruin his coat and continues on his way, leaving the child to drown. Is this morally wrong? Of course it is, said Singer, and this is important. It establishes a general moral principle that if you get the opportunity to save a child's life for $100, you must take it. Yet we have very many opportunities to save a child's life for $100. There are children starving in India. $100 would buy them food. There are children dying of malaria. $100 would buy them medication. There are children cowering in war zones.
$100 might buy them a ticket to safety. If you buy a nice coat for $100 instead of giving it to charity, you're making the same decision as the man in the story.
Indeed, if you use your money for anything other than charity, you're making that same decision, preferring your luxuries to a chance to avert innocent deaths. This was not a popular message. His opponents condemned his particular brand of academic philosophy, saying that the time-tested moral truths of religion ought to be enough for anybody. They might have done well to read their Bibles a little closer. Matthew 19:21, if you want to be perfect, go, sell everything you have and give the money to the poor, then follow me. Singer called the movement that grew up around him effective altruism, and its rallying cry was that one ought to spend every ounce of one's energy doing whatever most relieves human suffering, most likely either feeding the poor or curing various tropical diseases. Again, something his opponents rejected as impossible, unworkable, another example of liberal fanaticism. Really? Every ounce of your energy? Again, they could have just read their Bibles. Deuteronomy 6:5, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Then Singer changed his tune. In the 1970s, after the sky cracked and the world changed, he announced that charity was useless, that feeding the poor was useless, that curing tropical diseases was useless. There was only one cause to which a truly rational, truly good human being could devote his or her life. Hell must be destroyed. The idea of billions of human beings suffering unbearable pain for all eternity so outweighed our little earthly problems that the latter didn't even register. He began meeting with his disciples in secret, teaching them hidden names he said had been vouchsafed to him by angels. Thamiel put a price on his life. Quite a high price, actually. Heedless of his own safety, Singer traveled what remained of the civilized world, making converts wherever he went, telling them to be perfect as God was perfect. And every speech ended the same way. Hell must be destroyed. He was killed by a car bomb on his way to a talk in Salt Lake City. They never found the man responsible, if indeed it was a man. They saw Singer's body. They showed it on all the television networks. But some say he never died, or that he rose again on the third day, or that he speaks to them in dreams, or all manner of strange things. When the Comet King besieged hell, some say he brought Singer's bones as a relic. Others that Singer was in his retinue, disguised. But the conventional wisdom was that he truly died, which suited conventional people and their conventional morality just fine. But the soul is still oracular. Amid the market's din lists the ominous stern whisper from the Delphic cave within. They enslave their children's children who make compromise with sin. We're not making compromise with sin, we just want to be less than maximally saintly sometimes. Exactly what do you think compromise with sin is? This, then, is the Kabbalistic meaning of being a cantor and a singer, a namer of names. A cantor is someone who works with infinity, and a singer is someone who tries to be good. God, grant me the serenity to accept that I will never have the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Stephen Kaas. Early morning, May 11th, 2017. San Jose. The computer whirred and chattered, the speaker producing names faster than the ear could follow. I stared at the screen. I already knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. Last year I'd posted my paper, Exploitable Irregularities in Nehemoth Maharaj Mappings, to one of the big Singer bulletin boards online. I'd been nervous. Bad things happened to people who put names online. The law said webmasters were responsible for monitoring their own sites. Anyone who didn't delete a name was just as guilty as the person who'd posted it in the first place. But there were rumors of worse things. Webmasters being visited by men in black Unsong uniforms and politely asked to hand over IP addresses. People corresponding to those IP addresses getting jailed or just disappearing and never being seen again. There had been a site in the harmonious Jade Dragon Empire that had just presented a list of like 100 names right there for anyone who wanted to read them, but none of the search engines would show it, and anybody who linked to it got taken down in all senses of the word. I checked a few months ago and it was gone. But there was nothing illegal about posting methods to break Clipot. It was just math. They couldn't make math illegal. It would be like banning triangles. So I was nervous, but not too nervous. I remember sitting at my laptop. This was just after I'd gotten Sarah clicking the reload button every couple of seconds, watching the view count gradually increment up, from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2. Then a comment, some sort of stupid objection to the math. I don't remember what it was. Then another comment. Wow, I think you've actually done it. Then the view count going to 50, 60, 100 as people started linking to it. I remember that because of the compulsive refreshing. Each time I clicked, the little button might mean another morsel of praise. A few more people noticing me. Another stepping stone on my path to stardom. Only now it was even worse. Each moment lull might give me the little gong that meant it had found a name. Go to sleep, Anna mumbled. We were still in her room. She was in bed. The lights were off. I was sitting on the floor, checking lull once a minute or so, otherwise browsing social media. I'd just learned Perindil had a Facebook account. It was such a train wreck that I was having trouble averting my eyes. This is historic, I answered. When they ask us how our rise to total supremacy began, do you want to tell them that we went to sleep and then woke up in the morning to see if it worked? If we have total supremacy, we can just kill whoever asks us that question, said Anna. Go to sleep. I intend to be a benevolent ruler, I said. But I felt uncomfortable joking about it. A weird thought crossed my mind. Was Anna going to assassinate me in my sleep? Was that why she... No, said Anna. Come on, Aaron. It takes a special kind of person to be paranoid when we can read each other's minds. Go the euphemism to sleep. I was trying to figure out some way to continue the conversation and avoid having to go to sleep like a reasonable person when Sarah gave a melodic gong. Anna practically jumped out of bed, and in an instant she was right next to me at the computer. I minimized LOL and tried to open its output file, got an error message saying that the file was in use, groaned, paused LOL, tried again, saved to a different file, restarted LOL. 14 Hebrew letters. I looked them over closely to make sure they weren't a known name. There are people with Unsong who tattoo the Sentinel name above their ears, and then other names, the captive names, belonging to the theonomic corporations, on their foreheads. Then they can hear pretty much any name spoken within a couple of miles of them, and if they don't recognize the voice, or it's one that people aren't supposed to be using, they'll come and investigate. But they can only tattoo a name on themselves if they know about it. If the name we got was truly new, we were safe. And I didn't recognize it. I held the syllables in my mind, tasted them. I tested the correspondences. Wait, I said. I know what this does. I spoke. Kushantar Taval Anasasiva. A bright light appeared a couple of feet in front of my face. From the light sprung a beam, pointing up and a little to the west. Whoa, said Anna. Then, what's that? Name generation was hard partly because most names were pretty useless. Names to change the colors of flowers. Names to make sugar taste bitter. You might have to go through 5 or 6 before you got one of any use. The rejects were usually copyrighted, just to prevent anyone else from getting them in case they proved unexpectedly useful. Then languished, unknown in Unsong archives. It shows the location of the moon, I said. You mean in the sky? Well, it could be helpful if you're a sailor doing navigation things and it's a really cloudy night, or if you're trapped in an underwater cave and you don't know which way's up. Yeah, but... Then we stopped. I don't know if it was the telepathy or what, but both of us realized at that moment that it had worked. That any computer that could give us a name to find the moon would soon enough be giving us names to boil oceans or split mountains. We just stared at each other, awestruck. Then the computer gave another melodic gong. I'd calculated that it should come up with names on average once every couple of hours, but by the nature of averages, sometimes it would be faster. Anna and I almost knocked into each other in our rush to grab the mouse. Another round of pausing and restarting. The name was Hanaforkoda Salusi Nai Avorastekor USA. I spoke it once, then took off my glasses. I had perfect 20 vision. Again we stopped and stared at each other. If we wanted to cut and run, we could declare that we'd stumbled across this name through simple Kabbalistic study, then sell it to the theonomic of our choice. How much would people pay for a name that made eyeglasses unnecessary? Millions? Billions? We could both just retire, buy a house in Malibu, and 2 tickets on Celestial Virgin, and never work again. Ha! Said Anna, finally. You'd no more do that than Erica would. I'm not Erica. I don't think I have a revolutionary bone in my body. Oh, no? You're not the type to hand out leaflets or the type to go on marches. You're too intellectual for that.
That doesn't mean you're not revolutionary. It just means your revolutions are intellectual revolutions. That's what makes you so dangerous. Marx never handed out leaflets either.
You like to solve everything in your head? Then declare that a solution exists, and so you have done your part. It's completely harmless unless somebody takes you seriously, or unless you get enough power to enact your dreams at no cost to yourself.
You don't even know what my dreams are. You don't even know what your dreams are. It was kind of true. Ever since I'd been young, I'd wanted to be a Kabbalist. And then I'd gone to Stanford, then I'd gotten kicked out, and ever since then, I'd pretty much just been brooding. I fell in with the Unitarians not because I had any strong political views, but because they thought the world was unfair. I thought my life was unfair, and so we had a sort of synergy. Honestly, if a theonomic agreed to hire me as their chief Kabbalist tomorrow and gave me a nice office and a whole library full of books, chances are the next day I'd be on the news defending them and calling the singers a bunch of dirty hippies. Anna knew this, I think, but I couldn't just admit it. My dream is to become the new Comet King, I said. I'm not sure exactly where the phrase came from, but when I said it, it fit. You can't become the new Comet King, Anna said, in the same tone a kindergarten teacher might use to correct a boy who said he wanted to be a Tyrannosaurus when he grew up. Why not? I asked. He was a Kabbalist. I'm a Kabbalist. He knew all sorts of secret names. I'm going to know all sorts of secret names. He started with nothing. I start with nothing. He was born of the heavens. You were born of ordinary mortal parents. Ordinary mortal parents? Ha! My family can destroy worlds. This was true. My great-uncle Edward Teller invented the hydrogen bomb. My father, Adrian Teller, had followed in his footsteps and spent the 90s conducting unspecified nuclear research at Livermore Laboratories east of Fremont. My mother had been a waitress at the cafeteria there. The two met. They had a brief fling. She got knocked up. She told him so. He suddenly realized he had vitally important national security business to tend to on the opposite side of the country. So sorry about that. Good luck with the whole child-rearing thing. My mother was left alone to take care of me, whispering in my ear since the day I was born that I was a famous physicist's child, and I was going to be better than everyone else. I would invent the next big doomsday device and become rich and famous, and so she would be rich and famous. And then, all of the suffering she was going through as a single mother trying to get by on a waitress's salary would be worth it. In kindergarten, I scored through the roof on some kind of placement test and skipped 2 grades. My mother was so happy. I was happy too. I was making her proud. It was only later I realized that when other mothers were proud, you couldn't see the same glimmer of greed in their eye, the same restless energy that came from resisting the urge to rub their hands together and say, everything according to plan. At first, she would dip into her meager savings to buy me physics books, big tomes from the library on optics and mechanics. Then, when the theonomics became big, she realized that physics was, literally and figuratively, on its way out, and started getting me books on Kabbalah, the ones whose covers use faux Hebrew letters and whose authors write under vaguely Jewish-sounding pen names. This is probably the point at which a normal kid would have rebelled against the role he was being shoehorned into. But by happy coincidence, I loved Kabbalah. I loved the fluidity of it, picking everything apart and building it together exactly the way I wanted. I loved the power that I felt when I used one of the toy names that Unsong had let into the public domain. I met my father once when I was 13. I'd searched for him online on a whim, found his email, contacted him. He said he'd be in the California Republic for a conference later that year. And did I want to meet him for lunch? I did. We met at a Burger King in Berkeley. It was just the two of us. My mother refused to accompany me. My father asked how my mother was doing. I said she was fine, because telling him that she had been depressed and bitter for my entire life, and I was pretty sure it was because of him, seemed like the sort of thing that would spoil our lunch. He said he was proud that I was learning physics and Kabbalah. He said I would probably turn out to be a genius, like my great-uncle. It seemed both of my parents had mapped out my life in exactly the same way. He gave me a gift, a biography of Edward Teller, what else? And told me to make him proud. I spent the BART ride home, leafing through the book. I read about Teller's invention of the bomb. I mused over his retreat into an almost fanatical patriotism self-justification. A patch over the horror of what he had done.
I learned about his war against communist sympathizers in the physics community, and I read through one of his interviews, where someone asked him about being father of the hydrogen bomb. Reporter: is father an appropriate label? Teller: well, I made some essential contributions. I couldn't help imagining the same exchange an hour earlier, back at the Burger King. Is father an appropriate label? I would ask. Well, he would tell me, I made some essential contributions. So much for Adrian Teller, and so much for my heritage. More interesting was the poem. My great-uncle had written a traditional Kabbalistic alphabet poem. I don't think he did it on purpose. I don't think he knew he was working in a genre beloved by sages for centuries. I think he just sat down one day and thought it would be funny to write a poem on the different alphabet letters. It started. A stands for atom. It is so small, no one has ever seen it at all. B stands for bombs. Now the bombs are much bigger. So, brother, do not be too fast on the trigger. Then the book, the nerve of it, moves on. As if there was something more important than my great-uncle's correspondences between the letters of the alphabet to the aspects of the destruction he had unleashed. Oppenheimer might have been a Hindu heathen, but Teller must have been, deep down, a Kabbalist. Since then I've searched high and low, but I have only been able to find 2 more of his couplets. H has become a most ominous letter. It means something bigger, if not something better. It stands for secret. You'll keep it forever, provided there's nobody else who is clever. I obsessed over these when I was younger. Part of me thought they were secret messages to me. Part of me still does. The reference to brother on the B, for example. His brother was my grandfather. Don't tell me that's a coincidence. Nothing is ever a coincidence. What are you thinking, Aaron? The telepathy was weak. Anna had never been able to follow when I started brooding. S is for secret, I said. You'll keep it forever, provided there's nobody else who is clever. That's such an Aaron thing to say, she said. I don't know if she was thinking of my cryptography work, or just accusing me of always thinking I was the only clever person around. You think so? I asked. It's actually from my great-uncle. Maybe everyone who told me to grow up to be just like him got their wish after all. Aaron, said Anna, I like you, but you're not the kind of person I want to see inventing doomsday devices. We didn't even need the mind link for this one. Obvious response was obvious. What did she think we were doing? So, asked Anna, if you're going to be the new Comet King, does that mean you're going to go declare war against Hell, kill Thamiel, and save humanity? Yeah, I said, although I hadn't thought much about it. It did seem like the right thing to do, although I remembered reading something about how Thamiel was a facet of God and couldn't actually be killed. I figured a new Comet King would part that sea when he came to it. Oh, said Anna. What about you? I asked. You know, the Comet King's wife was... I'm not your wife, said Anna. The whole marriage ritual was a test. I'm glad we did it. It's interesting. But I'm not your girlfriend and I'm not your wife. God, I didn't mean... But to answer your question, Anna said, I don't know. I waited. Theodicy is really hard. I didn't expect to run into practical applications this soon. There's lots of evil in the world, and everyone wants to run out and fix it. In fact, there's this immense moral pressure to run out and fix it. But whenever someone tries, something goes horribly wrong. I mean, that's what Hitler tried to do. And the communists, trying to fix the world. Any more than just the boring kind of fixing the world where you hold a bake sale to support your local school. That's hubris. But refusing to do that, when you know people are starving and dying all around you, that's monstrous. So which are we, monstrous or arrogant? Me, I asked, arrogant, all the way. And I understand the impulse. It's tempting to run out there and play Joan of Arc. Jonah Whale, I corrected, Noah Ark. But I've read enough history to know how that ends. So, to answer your question, what do I want to do with this discovery? I think I want to do experimental theodicy. I want to know why God created a universe filled with so much evil. So I guess we can try to gradually start removing evil from the universe. Then if something goes wrong, that was probably the thing God was worried about. I blinked. That was kind of terrifying, even by my standards. I don't think it'll come to that, said Anna, still looking serious.
I think we'll reach some point, and then God will intervene. I want to see what that point is. How far we're allowed to push before our plans start mysteriously failing and any further efforts are to no avail. Noah Ark, I corrected. Jonah Whale. I thought we just went over this. Anna swatted me. I dodged. What's the chance that either of us is getting back to sleep tonight? She asked. I don't know about you, I said, but I'm going to Bill Dodd's house. What? It was, I had realized, the Comet King thing to do. I'd got proof of concept that our name generation plan worked. The next step was to get more computers. Lowell only worked on Apples. Eventually we'd have enough money to hire someone to make a Windows port, but for now, we were limited. Anna and Erica had Windows machines, but Bill had been boasting of his new computer incessantly for the past couple of weeks. It was expensive, it was lightweight, it was blindingly fast, and it was an Apple. I was going to convince him to let me borrow it. I wasn't sure how, but I was. Said Anna. We'll hold down the fort. She climbed back into bed. You're going to either need the Wakening name or a lot of coffee tomorrow. You really think I'm going to work tomorrow? I asked. Besides, do you think the Comet King would have delayed one of his plans for the salvation of the world just because he expected to be tired the next day? God, Aaron, you're not the euphemism Comet King. You are being way too gung-ho about all of this. Okay, but I was descended from the guy who invented the hydrogen bomb. Thinking through the implications of our discoveries was not exactly a family strong point. And the Comet King hadn't been wishy-washy. He hadn't been filled with self-doubt. They say that whenever someone asked the Comet King why he took the weight of the whole world on his shoulders, he just said, somebody has to, and no one else will. Was I arrogant to even make the comparison? Maybe. But I had crossed out of the realm of normal human life the moment I heard the vital name and realized it was a shortcut to omnipotence. Where I stood now, there was no model, no track to follow, save one. Only one person had ever had access to the sheer volume of names I was going to have. Ever stood alone and seen the future of humanity stretch out before him, malleable for the shaping. Well, what had happened to him was better left unsaid. But now there was another chance. I'll see you in a couple of hours, I told Anna. And then I strode out alone into the cold night air. Sleep like nothing is watching. Gaze at the stars like it will never hurt. Stephen Koss. Early morning, May 11th, 2017. San Jose. My watch read 5 a.m. Bill Dodd lived an hour's walk away, close to the weird morass of swamps and mudflats that passed for the San Francisco Bay in this area. He woke up around 6 and left at 7 for some tutoring job up in the North Bay. I figured by the time I got to his home, it would be just about morning, and I could catch him while he was getting ready. The streets were deserted, the houses dark. The cracks in the sky were barely visible through the hazy glow of the Silicon Valley megalopolis's United Street lamps. I could see a few stars. There was a time when the stars had meant something. Blake thought they were angels. Byron called them the poetry of heaven. The march of science transformed, but did not lessen them. They became burning suns trillions of miles away, around which humankind might one day find new worlds to colonize. Of all the scientists, only Enrico Fermi had come close to the truth, and in the end, even he had recoiled from it. One day back in the 50s, Fermi was having lunch out with my great-uncle out in Los Alamos, and the topic of conversation turned to where all the aliens were. If there were truly billions of stars with billions of planets, and the universe was billions of years old, then there had been ample opportunities for life to evolve on other worlds. Earth's sun was a cosmic infant. Other stars were incalculably older. Why in those billions of years had their civilizations not overtaken us, reached and colonized Earth just as earthly civilizations had reached and colonized their more isolated neighbors? Maybe life was incalculably rare, a spectacular fluke. Nonsense. Even in those days, scientists knew that if they stuck hydrocarbons in a jar and shook really hard, they'd get some very biological-looking compounds. Maybe it was multicellular life that was the bottleneck? Unlikely it evolved 3 separate times on Earth alone. Sapiens? Dolphins are practically sapient, so it must also be as common as dirt. Civilization developed separately in the Near East, China, Mexico, Peru, etc., etc. Space travel? You're trying to tell me that of 1 billion civilizations on 1 billion worlds over 1 billion years, not one would think of taking a really big rocket and pointing it up. Fermi crunched various numbers and found that even under the most conservative assumptions, the Earth should have been visited by just about 1 zillion extraterrestrial civilizations, instead of the 0 that humans actually observed. He figured there must be some unseen flaw in his calculations, and it bothered him a little for the rest of his life. He could have avoided a lot of anguish if he had just followed the data to their obvious conclusion and admitted the stars probably didn't exist. Then maybe things would have turned out differently. People respected Fermi. Always a good idea to respect the guy who invents the atomic bomb. Just in case he invents something else, they might have listened to him. The space age might have become more subdued. They might have wondered whether whatever was up there, whatever wanted people to think there were stars and was powerful enough to enforce the illusion, might be best left alone. But humans can't leave well enough alone, so we got in the space race, tried to send Apollo 8 to the moon, crashed into the crystal sphere surrounding the world, and broke a huge celestial machine belonging to the archangel Uriel that bound reality by mathematical laws. It turned out keeping reality bound by mathematical laws was a useful hack preventing the devil from existing. Break the machinery, and along with the names of God and placebomancy and other nice things, we got the devil back. We'd flailed around like headless chickens for a while, until the Comet King had come along and tried to organize a coordinated response. Now we were back to the headless chicken thing. A car sped down the street the way people speed at 5 a.m. when they know no one is around to stand in their way. The way assholes speed when they don't care how much noise they make on a residential street when people are trying to sleep. I stepped out of the way just in time. In a way, we were lucky. Reality was still mostly law-bound, because Uriel was burning through his reserves of mystical energy to keep the celestial machinery working. You can still run a car on internal combustion, if for some reason you don't trust the motive name. You can still usually use electronics to run a computer, as long as you don't overdo it and Uriel isn't having one of his periodic fits. But once there had been a time when we had looked up at the stars and thought, yeah, we'll go there someday, that dream was dead. Not just because there were no stars, but because the idea that science could do anything, that it was this genie humankind could command and turn to our most fantastic whims, was gone. If we were lucky, we could keep the power grid and the internet running. But the thought of building our way into a chrome and plasma future of limitless possibility had passed away sometime during the 70s. Now we just looked for useful names of God, and hoped Uriel kept science from failing too spectacularly until we got ourselves killed by something else. It was getting light by the time I reached the apartment, and a half-dressed Bill let me in. The, "What are you doing up so early and in my house?" was so obvious it could be left unspoken, so it was. "Hey, Bill," I said, plopping myself down on the couch. It was probably some kind of faux pas, but in my defense I'd been walking an hour. "Anna and I were wondering if we could borrow your gaming computer." He raised an eyebrow. "We've got this really interesting search function going on," I said, trying to match the fractal patterns in the Song of Songs to paleoclimate data. "I know it's a little weird, but we've actually got some good preliminary results. And I think we'd be able to finish in a couple of days if we had some more processing power. And you keep talking about how impressive your new Mac is. So I was hoping, why would the Song of Songs have fractal patterns?" Bill asked me. I had forgotten the most important thing about Bill, which was that he liked to think he was smarter than everybody else, and would pretend to know more than you about everything. Problem is, I was making this all up myself, so on the off chance he did know something, it was going to very quickly become clear that I didn't. "It's the Song of Songs," I said. "Of course, it has fractal patterns. In fact," I decided to go for broke. "I think there may be multiple levels of patterns in there. Songs of songs of songs." "That's not what Song of Songs means," Dot objected. "Hebrew uses of as an intensifier. Like King of Kings or Holy of Holies." "But consider," I said, "the words of Rabbi Ezra Sion, who said..." Then I started speaking Aramaic. Around 200 BC, the Aramaic language started catching on in Israel, and most people switched from Biblical Hebrew to the new tongue. Some people started praying in Aramaic or trying to translate the Torah. The rabbis, who wanted to protect the sacred language at all costs, waged a passionate campaign against Aramaic penetrating into the liturgy, and in the midst of their zeal, they might have kind of told the populace that they had to pray in Hebrew because the angels don't understand Aramaic. Some people wrote this down, one thing led to another, and it became part of the Talmud. Have I mentioned that the Talmud is kind of crazy? A couple of centuries later, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, the Jews are scattered to the 70 nations of the world, and now they're speaking all of these foreign languages like Yiddish and Arabic and Ladino. They don't know a word of Hebrew, but they still want to pray. The rabbis want to let them. But there's this old ruling standing in the way, saying that you should pray in Hebrew because the angels don't understand Aramaic. So the rabbis declare that actually the angels understand every language except Aramaic. This actually happened. And everyone thought it was a joke, but then the sky shattered, and we met the angels, and by golly they spoke every language from Albanian to Zulu. But Aramaic was nonsense to them. They couldn't learn it no matter how hard they tried. It was some kind of fixed mental blind spot. Why did the rabbis' weird ad hoc decisions so perfectly correspond to reality? I don't know. Nothing is ever a coincidence. But perhaps there are things humans were not meant to know. And when people started asking the angels, was Jesus Son of God? Was he the Messiah? The angels answered, darned if we know. We couldn't understand a word he was saying. One night, Anna and I were thinking thoughts at each other, gossiping about Bill, actually, since he just made a hilariously ill-fated attempt to seduce Erica, and Anna started feeling guilty because gossiping was a sin. I asked how anyone would find out we were gossiping when we were doing it telepathically, and there were no other telepaths in the world. Some said the Comet King had been able to read minds, but he was dead, and she said that we didn't know anything about Kabbalistic marriage. Maybe the angels could listen in on us or something. This was a pretty reasonable concern. Somebody had added that section to the Bible, the one in John that Anna had taken Scab Mom out of. And angels sounded like the sort of entities who had the power to edit the Bible. For all we knew, heaven was wiretapping our private channel. So we decided to learn Aramaic, so that we could gossip as much as we wanted, and the angels couldn't listen in. Neither of us was very good at it yet. But that didn't matter, because I was saying the practice sentences from Aramaic Made Easy, a beginner's guide. The dog is in the house, I told Dodd, in the cadences of first-century Judea. The dog is big and brown. Simeon is going to the synagogue. The dog is not going to the synagogue. Bill Dodd watched me intently as I spoke, wrinkles forming on his face. He had only two choices: accept what I had said as accurate, or admit he didn't understand Aramaic and therefore did not know everything. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Rabbi Zion was a very wise man, he finally told me. Then he went into his room and handed me his gaming laptop. If anything happens to that, he said as I stuffed it into my backpack, I will hunt you down and kill you. I nodded and made my escape before he changed his mind. When I made it back to Ithaca, I couldn't resist stopping off in Anna's room to check if Sarah had come up with any more names in my absence. It hadn't, which wasn't really surprising. 2 in so short a time was a huge fluke. But my presence there at least had the effect of waking Anna up. She rubbed her eyes, griped at me for waking her. Then, her tiredness melting away before the excitement of the occasion, told me to ensoul Bill's computer already. I took the sleek MacBook out of my backpack, plugged it into the outlet, fired it up. I installed lull. I disabled the internet connections, not wanting to risk anything, automatically updating and letting Bill know what we were doing. Then I spoke the vital name. Ros ail kafeluchton mirakoi kalaniemi, chanakaikai efsander galisto taho. And I began then. Meh. Nothing happened. There's no way to tell if a computer has a soul or not. But when you use a name, especially a strong name like this one, the warmth shoots through you. For a brief moment, you feel divine power. It's not just nothing. It's how people learn they've discovered a name in the first place. It's the thing whose computer equivalent lull is programmed to notice in order to detect hits. It was the thing I was definitely not feeling right now. Huh? I told Anna. That didn't work. I'll try it again. Once again, I spoke the name of God at Bill's computer. Rose ale kafelutan mirakoi kalaniemi. Shana kai efesander galisdo tahuin meh. Once again, nothing. Maybe you made a mistake, Anna suggested. I had not made a mistake. This will require a certain level of explanation. The vital name was 58 letters long. How did I remember a 58-letter name, let alone remember it so clearly that there was no chance of getting it wrong? The answer was that I was a mnemonist, and a really good one. Consider, a Roman legionnaire is sitting around, shining a lantern into the darkness, watching for enemies. One suddenly appears, namely, Kim Jong-un, who is soaring overhead on a giant flying lantern. The legionnaire calls for help, and who should arrive but a Tyrannosaurus Rex, nibbling on a magazine which he keeps in his mouth, and he dispatches the dictator easily. The Roman is so grateful for T-Rex's help that he knights him on the spot, declaring him Sir Tyrannosaurus. But he doesn't have a sword for the ceremony, so he squirts ketchup all over him instead. Abraham Lincoln, who is also in the area, comes by to celebrate. He's a fast friend of the Tyrannosaurus, as he shares the dinosaur's quirk of nibbling on magazines. And now you have 14 letters. I am a mnemonist. My hobby is memory. I study very complex systems for remembering long strings of meaningless information. The mnemonists talk about how you can remember entire decks of cards in sequence, or 100-digit numbers after a single reading, but those are smokescreens. The real reason smart people become mnemonists is to remember names. The average singer spends half an hour at choir practice every week, learning a single name through constant repetition. Slow but effective. But what if you overhear someone just once using a true name without any clip-a? How are you going to remember it unless you have extreme measures available? My extreme measure was a variant of something called the Dominic system. Memorize 3 sets of correspondences between alphabet letters and concepts. The first set is between each letter and a person or animal beginning with that letter. The second set is between each letter and an action beginning with that letter. And the third set is between each letter and an object beginning with that letter. Now break down the thing you want to remember into 3-letter blocks. Each block represents a person performing an action on an object. Keep doing this, and you have a really weird story, which is exactly the sort of story you are most likely to remember. My R person is a Roman. My S action is sitting. My L object is a lantern. Ras Ile becomes a Roman sitting with a lantern. It's Hebrew, so the vowels don't count. My K person is Kim Jong-un. My F action is flying. My L object is still a lantern, so Kim Jong-un is flying on a giant lantern. Add the Tyrannosaur nibbling, and you've got Caphaluton. Remembering Ras Ile Caphaluton is hard. Remembering a Roman sitting watchfully in the dark with a lantern, only to have Kim Jong-un suddenly scream past him on a lantern-shaped fighter jet, so terrifying that they have to call in the dinosaur cavalry? That's easy. Keep going, and even a 58-letter name becomes tractable. Is it hard to make these kinds of stories up on the fly? Yes, it's hard the first time, and the 100th time, and even the 1000th time. But I work 8 hours a day in a sweatshop where all I do is recite a bunch of meaningless syllables. I'd have gone crazy long ago if I didn't have some way to make it all useful. And my way of making it all useful was to train myself to become really good at mnemonics. The 58-letter vital name shone flawless in my mind. Ros ale Caphaluton Mirakoi Kalanyemi, Tashana Kai Kai Efsander Galisto Tahuen. I began, and kept going. I spoke the vital name. It didn't work. Anna, I said, you have the name. You try? I only know what I took from your head, Anna said, but she spoke the name as she recalled it. Ros ele Caphaluton Mirakoi Kalanyemi, Tashana Kai Kai Efsander Galisto Tahuen. I could see from Anna's face that she felt nothing. Maybe it's just... We're not feeling it because we're tired, I said. I fiddled with the settings of lull, told it to investigate just one name, the moon-finding name we had discovered last night. The speaker let out its strange hum. There was no output. Bill's computer had failed to detect it as a name. Maybe the name stopped working, Anna suggested. Names don't stop working. You think God just packed up and went on vacation or something? It probably says a lot about us that we decided it was important to test this hypothesis and so started using all the other names we knew. The simple ones, the ones we could use without exhausting ourselves or causing trouble. I tried the moon-locating name from this morning. A big bright arrow appeared pointing toward the western horizon. Okay, I admitted. God didn't pack up and go on vacation, then why the hell isn't the name working? I was seeing our goal of inevitable world conquest fade into a comparatively modest future of limitless wealth. The one ensouled computer we had could give us enough names to buy a small state, but minus the ability to ensoul more of them, the feedback loop that resulted in total domination of everything and a second Comet King was fading out of reach. Anna was quiet. After a few seconds, she just said euphemism. "You expected this all along," I said. "You said God was going to intervene." "Not directly," she said.
"And not this soon! And not like this!" My mind was racing. "Okay," I said. "This isn't a disaster. Maybe it's not God. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe we can just use the name error correction algorithms. Given the constraints all names have to follow, you could find the most likely name candidates matching a flawed name with one or two letters out of place. Although in principle, it was meant to address exactly the sort of situation we were in right now. In reality, people almost never forgot names that weren't backed up somewhere already, and it was mostly a purely theoretical field people investigated as basic research. It's all fun and games, until a plot to take over the world hinges on it. You think that would help? Look, maybe possibly there's a tiny chance a mnemonist like me could forget a letter or two, but no more than that. We mostly have the name intact. So if I can get some of the error correction algorithms, we can run them on what we remember of the vital name and figure out the real thing. I took a class that mentioned this at Stanford once. I'm sure there are some books in the library there. Give me your library card and I'll go get them.
You come with me. Aaron, said Anna, you barely slept all night. The error correction books will still be there this afternoon. Anna, I said, we had the most important name in history, short of the Shem HaMepharash, and we lost it. No, we didn't lose it. I know what it is. Something isn't right here. I grabbed the library card from her desk. Are you coming or not? Pass, she said, infuriatingly. My mind burning, I set out for the Caltrain station in Stanford.
Love is the law, but it is poorly enforced. Reverend Raymond Stevens, Singers in the Hands of an Angry God. March 20th, 2001. Aglo, the holy city of traditional Kabbalah, is Tzfat in Israel, where Rabbi Isaac Luria taught and died.
The holy city of modern Kabbalah ought to be Aglo, New York. The story goes like this. 2 map makers had just finished collecting geographic data for the definitive map of New York State. They worried that other people might steal their work and pass it off as their own. They'd never be able to prove anything, since all accurate maps look alike. So the map makers played a little trick. They combined their initials to make the word Aglo, then added it as a fake town on the map in an out-of-the-way location. Any other map makers whose work included Aglo would be revealed as plagiarists. One day, a man came to an empty crossroads and decided to build a store there.
He looked at his map, found that the spot was named Aglo, and named his business Aglo General Store. The store was a success, the location attracted more people, and soon the town of Aglo sprang up in earnest. In traditional semiotics,
Reality is represented by symbols which are themselves inert. In Kabbalah, reality and symbols alike are representations of Adam Kadmon. The territory is a representation of Adam Kadmon, and the map is a representation of the territory and Adam Kadmon. Differences between the map and the territory may not be mere mistakes, but evolutions of the representational schema that affect both alike. The territory has power over the map, but the map also has power over the territory. This is the Kabbalah. The rest is just commentary. When map and the territory both depend on each other, to assert copyright is a dangerous act. The 2 cartographers stuck their name on the map to claim dominion, but dominion over the divine order producing both map and territory belongs only to God.
But the 2 cartographers named the city by combining the initials of their names. This is an ancient Kabbalistic technique called notarikon, in which words are generated from the initials of longer phrases. Many of the names of God are notarikons of Bible verses or prayers. Some say all names, however long, are notarikons for increasingly accurate descriptions of God. But the most famous such notarikon uses only 4 words. The short liturgical formula, Ata Gibor Le'olam Ai, meaning, Thou art mighty forever, O Lord. The phrase's initials become the famous 4-letter name Agla. Does it have to be Agla? The Li in Leolam means 2. The Olam means the world. The Hebrew word translated forever literally means to the end of the world.
Nice and poetic, but lay and olam are two different words and should be counted as such. And why AI? Yes, it's one of the common divine names in the Bible, but the Bible has other divine names. How about the more common one, Elohim? Then the formula becomes Ata Gibor Le'olam Elohim, and the name becomes Agloe. This is not a coincidence because nothing is ever a coincidence. Two cartographers add a town named after themselves to a map to assert copyright. Because the map and territory correspond to each other, a few years later, the same town appears on the territory. The town and the territory also functions as an assertion of copyright, but because the notarikon producing the town name matches a notarikon producing one of the names of God, the Kabbalistic implications of the copyright remain accurate. Despite all this, there are no yeshivas or great gold-domed synagogues in Aglo. To the casual traveler, it's just another sleepy upstate New York town. But sometimes people who need a site with very specific Kabbalistic properties find the town's name and story conducive to their activities. And so tonight the leadership of the American Board of Ritual Magic was holding a special meeting in an old mansion in the hills outside town. Mark McCarthy, Archmage of the West, stepped into the banquet hall. He leaned upon his staff of mesquite wood and inspected the area. All the furniture was gone, and an exquisitely precise map of the United States had been drawn in chalk in the center of the room. There was a long pendulum hanging from the ceiling, currently over the Midwest, and a trapdoor under Wyoming. "Why?" he asked. "Is there a trapdoor under Wyoming?" Two others were already there. Like himself, they wore gray robes and carried wooden staffs. He recognized Daniel Lee, Archmage of the South, and Clara Lowell, Archmage of the Northeast and current board president. "This was the largest space we could reserve on short notice," Clara said. "The trapdoors to the wine cellar. One of the best collections in this area, I hear. Once we're done with the ritual, we can go downstairs and get something to celebrate." "I don't like it," said Mark. "It ruins the ambience." This was a grave accusation among ritual magicians. Ambience was a vital ingredient of rituals. It was why the room was lit by flickering candles. It was why they were all dressed in gray robes. It was why they met so late in the evening, so they could do the deed precisely at midnight. And it was why they were here in Aglo, New York, a town corresponding both phonetically and procedurally to one of the names of God. "It doesn't," said Lowell. "The trapdoor is a rectangle. Wyoming is a rectangle. It's fine. This whole thing is overkill anyway. You're the one who insisted we do this high level. I wanted to delegate to 5 interns in the basement of the DC office and save ourselves the trouble." "And I'm telling you," said McCarthy, "I know Alvarez. He probably doesn't sound scary. One guy who isn't even fully licensed. But if we leave him any holes, he's going to slip through them, and something awful will happen." "I see the doomsaying has already started," said Ronald Two Hawks, Archmage of the Pacific Northwest, walking in with his staff of Sitka pine. "I'm with Clara. Getting all the way here from Olympia was a mess. And for what? To deal with the biggest threat that the board and ritual magic itself have ever encountered," said McCarthy. "So a low-level magician has gone terrorist," said Ronald. "Killed a senator. Embarrassing. Certainly something we have to condemn. But by making such a big deal of this, we just reinforce our link to him in the public mind. We should have put out a statement distancing ourselves, sent someone over to the Shroudies to help them catch him, and ignored it." Carolyn Pace, Archmage of the Midwest, walked into the room. "There's a trapdoor under Wyoming," she said. "Yes," said Daniel. "We were just talking about that." "Let's get started," said Clara. A chalk circle had been drawn around the map. Clara positioned herself at the east, Daniel at the south, Mark at the west, and Ronald at the north. Carolyn went in the middle, stood at the precise center of the United States near Lebanon, Kansas. Her nose almost touched the pendulum. The force of her breath gave it an almost imperceptible swing. The clock read 11:54. "Let no evil approach from the north," said Ron, and he held his staff of Sitka pine towards Carolyn in the center of the circle. "Est sit esto fiat," chanted the others. "Let no evil approach from the west," said Mark, and he held his staff of mesquite towards the center. "Est sit esto fiat," came the chant. "Let no evil approach from the south," said Daniel, and he held out his staff of magnolia. "Est sit esto fiat. Let no evil approach from the east," finished Clara, and she held out her staff of white oak. "Est sit esto fiat." Carolyn raised up her staff of cottonwood. The flaming circle keeps everything in. Aleph, Gimel, lamed. Aleph. The flaming circle keeps everything out. Aleph, hey, Yud. Hey, let the worlds open, but let the circle hold. No black flames shot up from the boundaries of the circle. No alien light appeared within it, but the chalk lines upon which they stood started to take on an odd sheen, reflect the candlelight a little differently. Ritual magic couldn't do the impossible, couldn't break the laws of physics on an observable scale, but they shifted things within that envelope, made coincidences happen a lot more frequently. The sudden appearance of flames would have broken natural law. But there was nothing impossible about 5 sleep-deprived people in an unusual emotional state, seeing the gleam of a chalk line a little differently. So they did. Before me, Michael, said Ronald in the north. Behind me, Uriel, said Daniel in the south. On my left hand, Raziel, said Mark in the west. On my right hand, Gabriel, said Clara in the east. Quod est inferius, est sicut quod est superius, said Daniel in the south. Quod est superius, est sicut quod est inferius, said Ronald in the north. Then Carolyn raised her cottonwood staff high. Around me flare the pentagrams, and in the center stands the 6-rayed star. Every candle in the room sputtered out at once. Not magically. Clara's staff had electronics that controlled the room in various ways, all part of the ambience. The moon came out from behind a cloud. That part was magical, and shone its cold white beams into the room, reflecting off the hardwood floor and the windows in odd patterns. For a second, everyone saw the pentagrams and the 6-rayed star just as they had named them. Then the moon went back behind a cloud, and they disappeared before anyone could be entirely certain it hadn't been a coincidence. Clara spoke. We gather here tonight to call penalty upon one who has broken our law. Dylan Alvarez, apprentice ritual magician, has broken fellowship with the board. He has violated federal and state regulation that prohibit practicing ritual magic without being a board member in good standing. He has announced his intention to continue practicing without a license. He has killed several local officials of the American Board of Ritual Magic in order to, in his own words, make a point. He has assassinated Senator John Henderson, the board's foremost ally in Congress. He has declared war on the American magical establishment. He has mocked ritual magic as placebalmancy, and publicly released the secrets he had sworn to protect. For all this, he has been condemned by our board and by our order. The room was dead silent. The only light was moonlight from the high windows. The clock read 11:58. He has violated the laws of God and man, and we will have justice. The justice of God does not concern us. The justice of man will be swift and merciless. Show the location of Dylan Alvarez unto us, O powers, that we may pour upon him the cup of our wrath. Show, said Daniel in the south. Show, said Mark in the west. Show, said Ronald in the north. Show, said Clara in the east. Show, said Carolyn in the center, and she gave the pendulum a big push, then retreated to the outside of the circle. The clock read 12 o'clock. The giant pendulum veered wildly over the map of the United States. It hung by a special rope with odd kinks and tangles that gave its motion an unpredictable, chaotic quality, and prevented it from ever quite going vertical. After various false starts and sudden jerks, it ended up pointing to the city of Amarillo, Texas. Clara flicked her staff, and the lights came on again. Well, she said, that was easy. We'll contact the Texas Republic and the Amarillo police tomorrow morning. Shouldn't be too hard. Better send the Shroudies, said Mark. I'm telling you, things involving Dylan Alvarez are always hard. You thought this ritual would be hard, said Ronald. I know you knew the guy in college. I know you've got a history, but give it a break. He's an unlicensed magician. Sometimes it happens. We always get them. Someone said something about wine, didn't they? Said Daniel. What are we waiting for? The pendulum made a sudden jerk and ended up over Little Rock, Arkansas. What the? Asked Ronald. Oh, this isn't good, muttered Mark. Clara stepped into the magic circle, inspected the pendulum, then... Relax, the ritual is over. The lights are on. At this point, the movements of the pendulum are just random noise. He's in Amarillo. Random noise? Asked Ronald. You saw that. There was nothing touching that pendulum, and it just gave this sudden lurch. One of the kinks in the rope straightening itself out, said Clara, could have been a coincidence. Of course it could have been a coincidence.
said Carolyn. "This is ritual magic. It could always have been a coincidence. But it never is." "You're being silly," said Clara. "All the darkness and ritual and everything have got us all in a horror movie frame of mind. Let's go get some wine and forget about it." "I am telling you," said Mark. "Something is wrong. Nothing's ever simple with Dylan. It's always like this. We need to figure this out or he'll run circles around us." "So what do you think?" asked Clara. She was starting to sound annoyed. "That he teleported from Amarillo to Little Rock the minute we completed our ritual? Dylan Alvarez is a two-bit hedge wizard. Let's just—" She barely dodged the pendulum as it swung straight through where she had been standing. Now it was above Lincoln, Nebraska. Then another swing. St. Louis, Missouri. Then another. Somewhere in the middle of North Dakota. "You saw that?" said Mark. "Don't you dare tell me you didn't see that! I knew this was going to happen. Something's wrong with the ritual, and I told you this was going to happen. Mark, calm down," said Daniel. "Dylan's probably doing a ritual of his own to interfere with us." "It's not like this ritual was particularly secret. We all had to get to Aglo. Anyone who's watching our movements would have known we were planning something for today, and it wouldn't be too hard to figure out what that was." Salt Lake City, Utah. "You're saying Dylan Alvarez has spies in the American Board of Ritual Magic?" asked Carolyn, horrified. "The Idaho Panhandle." "Well, why not?" asked Ronald. "I'm starting to agree with Mark. Maybe we've been underestimating this guy." "Casper, Wyoming." "For the last time," said Clara, "Dylan Alvarez is a two-bit hedge wizard who doesn't know anything about—" "Surprise, motherfuckers!" yelled Dylan Alvarez, jumping out of the trapdoor with a revolver in each hand. Bang, bang! Down went Daniel Lee, Archmage of the South. Bang, bang, bang! Down went Ronald Two Hawks, Archmage of the Pacific Northwest. Carolyn Pace traced figures in the air with her cottonwood staff. "Libera nos, Domine," she said as she traced. "Te rogamus audi nos." Bang, bang, bang! 3 bullets went wide. It could have been a coincidence, but coincidences tended to happen more often among ritual magicians at work. Bang, bang, another 2 coincidences. Dylan dropped the guns, reached back down into the trapdoor, and grabbed his staff. Boojum wood comes from the boojum tree, a bizarre species of plant that grows only in a tiny part of Baja California. It looks a little like a 70-foot-tall upside-down carrot, bent at undignified angles. Dylan Alvarez came from Baja California, and his staff was of boojum wood. He swung it wildly at Carolyn, a huge berserker swing. Carolyn countered with her own cottonwood staff. But Dylan executed a very precise disengage and smashed her skull straight in. Clara and Mark were practically on top of him now, reciting their own incantations. "Imperet illi Deus deprecamur," chanted Clara. "Defende nos in proelio." "Caecilius est in horto," chanted Dylan. "Servus est in atrio." Clara looked at him with hatred in her eyes. "Vini in auxilium hominum," chanted Clara. "Fugi partes adversae." "Cerberus est canis," chanted Dylan. "Canis est in culina." Staffs crossed with a sound like a thunderclap. Dylan took a second to parry Mark, then ran at Clara as fast as he could. Clara stood fast, her oak staff and guard in front of her. At the last second, Dylan rolled out of the way, and the pendulum, still tracking his movement, smashed into Clara, knocking her off her feet. Dylan drove the staff into her neck and finished her off. Then he turned to Mark McCarthy, the only one left standing. "Mark, please tell me you're as embarrassed by these people as I am." Mark McCarthy, Archmage of the West, took off his hood. "Dylan," he said, "I wish I could say I was surprised to see you here, but not really. Look, I even wore a bulletproof vest." He opened his robe a little bit to show the Kevlar beneath. Dylan laughed, then slapped him on the back. "Mark, me, hurt you? We went to college together. Compadres para siempre." "That was the plan," said Mark. "And then you turned weird magical terrorist. Weird magical freedom fighter, more like." Dylan corrected, then laughed at his own joke. "Is that really how you think of me? I'm not that scary, am I?" "Dylan, you killed Senator Henderson with a letter bomb. 2 days after the Shroudies assigned him a personal bomb squad to search through all his mail. How did you even do that?" "You think I can't pull off a convincing Shroudie if I want to?" Mark groaned as it snapped into place. "There was no bomb squad. Your people were the bomb squad. In my defense, if I had meant to offer the senator a bomb removal squad, I would have said bomb removal squad. There are a couple different ways people can freak out when the necessity arises,
They can curl up into a little ball and mutter to themselves. They can go berserk and start smashing things. They can freeze up and go very, very quiet. Mark McCarthy started laughing uproariously, a little longer than could be considered strictly appropriate. Dylan tapped his boojum wood staff impatiently. Your talents are wasted with these people, Mark. Back in college you always agreed with me about the government and the board and all those asshats. Well, I'm done flying solo. I'm putting together a group of like-minded individuals. We call ourselves Boojum. Boojum? What does that stand for? Solidarity with the oppressed everywhere. You should join us, Mark. We could use a man of your skills. Mark McCarthy glanced toward the exit. So enticing. Just a few dozen feet away. He could just make a mad dash and be out of there, couldn't he? Or was Dylan one step ahead of him again? He looked at the door. Looked at Dylan. Looked at the door again. If he was going to survive this, he would have to think like Dylan. The problem was, Dylan was insane. 30 years ago, when the sky cracked, the assortment of hermeticists, Wiccans, and uncool teenagers practicing magic noticed that their spells were starting to actually work. Never unambiguously. But the perfectly possible things they asked of their magic were starting to happen more often than chance. Of course, they ran around telling everybody, and some people did controlled experiments, and finally people started to believe them. 100 different schools of witches and warlocks went around curing people's illnesses and blessing sea voyages, and helping people find their true loves. After that first rapid expansion stopped, the schools started competing with each other. Our magic is good and effective. Your magic is evil and worthless. As usual, the well-connected Ivy League graduates won. They declared the Western Hermetic tradition to be the one true school, convinced the bigwigs that everyone else was unsafe, and got a state monopoly as the American Board of Ritual Magic. Anyone who wanted to practice ritual magic had to complete an 8-year apprenticeship under a licensed ritual magician or face fines or imprisonment for practicing magic illegally. The other schools went underground but never disappeared completely. After a decade of irrelevance, they found a new champion in Robert Anton Wilson, who proposed a theory that directly contradicted the urbane hermeticism of the board. According to Wilson, ritual magic is to reality as the placebo effect is to humans. Tell a human that a sugar pill will cure their toothache, and the pill will make the toothache disappear. Tell reality that a ritual will make rainfall, and the ritual will cause a downpour. In Wilson's system, ambiance wasn't just the most important thing, it was the only thing. Doctors have long known how every aspect of the medical experience enhances placebo effect. The white coat, the stethoscope, the diplomas hung and framed on the wall. All subconscious reassurances that this is a real doctor prescribing good effective medicine. Likewise, the job of a ritual magician, or in Wilson's terminology, placebomancer, was to perform a convincing wizard act. The gray robes, the flickering candles, incantations said on the proper day and hour, even shrines and holy places. They all added an extra element of convincingness, until finally reality was well and truly bamboozled. Wilson teamed up with Robert Shea to perform a series of experiments testing his hypothesis. In their work, Placebomancer, they tested 2 rituals to produce rain, one invoking the demon Amdusius, the other the demon Cravano. Both produced the same couple centimeters of rainfall, even though Amdusius was a great king of hell, who had been known to occultism for hundreds of years. And Cravano was a set of 7 letters pulled out at random from a bag of Scrabble tiles. As long as they gave the ritual a sufficiently ominous ambience, both invocations worked alike. The American Board of Ritual Magic answered the challenge by getting Wilson and Shea locked up for unlicensed practice of magic, then paying for a series of TV ads where attractive women in robes told viewers that their children were too important for the government to allow charlatans to go on practicing untested magic spells. So much for that. A few licensed magicians complained or poked at the boundaries that the board had set for them, but whenever it became too much of a threat, the board would revoke their licenses, and there the matter would rest. For to get one's magician's license revoked was a terrible thing. Who would trust a placebo given by a doctor stripped of his medical diploma, dressed in street clothes, working out of his garage? A magician who lost his license would lose the ability to convince reality of anything. The American Board of Ritual Magic, originally a perfectly ordinary example of regulatory capture,
had taken on ontological significance, so nobody had been too worried when young apprentice magician Dylan Alvarez had pissed off one too many people, gotten expelled from the board, and vowed revenge. He was just an apprentice after all, and anyway, he'd lost his license. Good luck convincing the universe of anything now. But Alvarez had realized that there are people without medical degrees who hand out convincing placebos. They just don't do it by pathetically begging people to believe they're doctors. They do it by saying they're better than doctors, that they've discovered hidden secrets, that the medical establishment is in cahoots against them. But they'll show the fools. Oh yes, they'll show them all. A good naturopath armed with a couple of crystals and a bubbling blue solution can convince thousands, millions, even in the face of mountains of contradictory evidence. Ambiance, they realize, is really a subset of a stronger power, the power of narrative. The literary tropes declaring that, given A, B is sure to follow, all the other schmucks who had been expelled from the board had begged to be let back in, or they'd tried to hide it from reality, to claim that they were really magicians after all, that the decision had been unfair, didn't count, wasn't a big deal. Reality hadn't bought it. Dylan had declared that if the board had set themselves at odds against him, so much worse for the board. And reality had eaten it up. Now an entire guild of people who prided themselves on remaining on the right side of narrative tropes had to deal with a devilishly handsome rebel, with a cause who had sworn to dismantle their entrenched oppressive bureaucracy with fire and sword, and who did clever witty things like hide in a wine cellar so that a magically charged pendulum would track his real-world location underneath the floor rather than his analogical location on a map. Can you imagine a story where a man lies in wait to assassinate the 5 masters of the American Board of Ritual Magic, even as they are plotting to kill him, confounds their ritual, bursts out of the trapdoor to their wine cellar at the most theatrical possible moment, raises his staff made of a rare and exotic wood that grows only his far-off homeland, and then dies ignominiously, shot by a security guard before he can get a word in edgewise? No. You can't imagine the story ending that way. Neither can reality. That was Dylan Alvarez's secret. He always tried to be the protagonist of whatever story he was in, and the protagonist never dies. The protagonist's old college buddy who is sold out to the establishment has no such protection, a trope of which Mark McCarthy was painfully aware. Dylan, he said, I've got a wife now, and kids. You're not going to kill me if I say no, are you? Not a plea, a gambit. Dylan Alvarez wanted to be the protagonist, but the sort of guy who kills a man with a wife and kids. Well, that's not just evil, it's crass. The sort of thing that breaks narratives, turns you from a dashing rebel into a pathetic thug. Mark, said Dylan, looking genuinely offended, don't be dramatic, compadres para siempre, remember? When you had known Dylan Alvarez for a long time, long enough to learn the difference between bomb squads and bomb removal squads, you learned to notice when he hadn't directly answered your question. Look, Dylan, it's not that I don't have good memories of our times together. It's just, after what happened with Senator Henderson, and now everything that's happened here tonight, everyone is after you. The police, the Shroudies, heck, maybe even Unsong. And, well, like I said, I've got a wife and kids. No, said Mark finally. I'm not a terrorist. Kill me if you will. And he dropped his staff on the ground and held up his hands. Dylan made a pfft sound and then went back to the trapdoor. He picked up his guns, a few odd devices, and a bottle of wine, slipped all of them into the pockets of his robes. Then he walked back to McCarthy and hugged him hard. Good luck with things, Mark. And if you ever change your mind about Boojum, you know how to find me. I really don't. Just hang up another pendulum. Alvarez laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, slapped McCarthy on the back, then grabbed his staff and disappeared out the door into the night. Mark McCarthy, the last remaining Archmage of North America, took a deep breath. Out, then in. Then he started shaking and fell to his knees in relief. He picked up his cottonwood staff and grasped it to him, kneeling, trembling. 3.5 minutes later, the police burst through the door. They had received an anonymous tip by a man with a slight Mexican accent, saying that they would find the man who had killed his 4 fellow archmages, sitting alone and sobbing among the bodies of his victims. There is now an Author's Note section on the menu above, and Author's Note 1 is up. The claim that the Talmudic sages were great Kabbalists is a historical error. Most sages make no mention of the Kabbalistic tradition at all. Shimon bar Yochai, who lived in a cave and composed 1,700 pages of Kabbalistic texts, is an exception, and should be considered separately. Bar Yochai spent 13 years hiding from the Romans in a cavern near Peki'in, and took advantage of his long downtime to write what would later become the Zohar, the founding work of Kabbalah, as brilliant as it is impenetrable. Worried that it would lead younger students into flights of overwrought superstition, the Orthodox banned study of the Zohar to everyone except married Jews above the age of 40, and even these carefully selected students tended to go off the deep end after a while. The circumstances of the Zohar's composition are widely believed to be the origin of the old rabbinic proverb against delving too deep into arcane secrets, Loe tikons la marvat, meaning don't go into the caves. Gebron and Eleazar, Kabbalah, A Modern Approach, October 3, 1990, Gulf of Mexico. We say that man was made in the image of God, said Uriel, but God is ineffable, and without physical form. Resolve the paradox. I'm hungry, said Sohu. She was sitting on a little cloud, a dozen or so meters across. In the middle, the cloud stuff had been piled up into a little amorphous cottage where she slept and stored her books. On the far end of the cloud was the flying kayak, tied down with cloud ropes. Uriel thought for a moment. I can make more mana. I had mana yesterday and the day before. It doesn't taste like anything. Sorry, you are very picky. We're in the middle of an ocean. Aren't there fish or something? The Archangel bent down, reached into the deep, and placed a giant grouper the size of a jeep on Sohu's cloud. It flailed half-heartedly for a moment, then stared at Sohu with dinner plate-sized lidless eyes. It looked resigned. As I was saying, God has no physical form, so the claim that humans were made in the image of God must have some more subtle meaning. Rabbi Akiva proposed. Uriel, protested Sohu. What are you doing? I am teaching you the Kabbalah. I can't eat this. It is a fish. It is kosher and full of nutrients. It's staring at me. That makes sense. It does not have eyelids. Uriel, make it stop! Fast as lightning, the Archangel rearranged some of the glowing letters in front of him, causing them to pulse and whirl ominously. The fish had eyelids. It blinked. That doesn't help. You are very picky. The poor fish gave up the ghost. Humans don't just eat giant fish the size of jeeps. They need to be cut apart and cooked and covered in breadcrumbs, and I like them with ketchup, even though Father says it makes me a barbarian. A series of knives rained from the sky, barely missing the girl's head, and embedded themselves point down in the cloud. They were followed by frying pans and entire stoves, and bottles of ketchup, and finally, mana. Sorry, said Uriel. It was the closest I could come to bread. Sohu stared at the objects for a while, then sighed, then picked up one of the larger knives. Rabbi Akiva proposed that the verse has been misinterpreted. God made man in his image means a God made man according to an image belonging to God. In other words, man was built to a specific celestial blueprint. We call that blueprint Adam Kadmon, meaning original man. Adam Kadmon is the blueprint not only for man, but for the entire universe. The relationship between this blueprint and the universe itself is the basis of Kabbalah. Sohu cut through a scale, and was rewarded with a spurt of blood for her efforts. She shrieked and almost fell off the cloud. "Ak!" she said, then, "Sorry, I was listening."
Really? Novices in Kabbalah expect there to be a simple correspondence between aspects of Adam Kadmon and objects in the universe.
For example, one part of Adam Kadmon might describe humans, another might describe trees, and another might describe the stars. They believe you can carve up the different features of the universe, much like carving a fish, and simply... No, said Sohu, who was still trying to wipe blood off herself. No fish-carving metaphors. They believe you can carve up the different features of the universe, entirely unlike carving a fish. The angel corrected himself. But in fact, every part of the blueprint is contained in every object as well as in the entirety of the universe. Think of it as a fractal, in which every part contains the whole. It may be transformed almost beyond recognition, but the whole is there. Thus, studying any object gives us certain domain general knowledge which applies to every other object. However, because Adam Cadman is arranged in a way dramatically differently from how our own minds arrange information, this knowledge is fiendishly difficult to detect and apply. You must first cut through the thick skin of contingent appearances before reaching the heart of, cutting metaphors, Sohu told the Archangel. She had finally made a good incision and was slowly pulling things out of the fish, sorting them by apparent edibility. The Bible is an especially clear example of a system which is isomorphic to Adam Cadman. So are all human languages. So is the human body. So is the tarot. So are the works of William Blake. So is the sky and constellations. Sohu nodded. Was that a spleen? Did fishes even have spleens?
There are 4 Gospels in the Bible, 4 letters in the Tetragrammaton, 4 limbs on the human body, 4 suits of the tarot, 4 zoas in Blake, and 4 quarters of the sky. The novice considers this a coincidence.
The adept understands this is because the number 4 is an important organizing principle of Adam Cadman, and insofar as all systems reflect Adam Cadman, they are also organized into 4 parts. Sohu managed to extract the heart from the fish. For a second she felt some strange significance at seeing it divided neatly into 4 chambers. Then she shook herself out of it and moved on. There are 10 commandments in the Bible, 10 digits in the number system, 10 fingers on the human body, 10 pip cards in the tarot, 10 prophetic books in Blake, and 10 celestial bodies in the sky. 10 celestial bodies. 8 planets, the sun, and the moon. There are 22 books in the Hebrew Bible, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, 22 somatic chromosomes in the human body, 22 major arcana in the tarot, 22 engravings in Blake's Book of Job, and 22 constellations in each of the 4 quarters of the sky. Sohu wiped off her hands. She was pretty sure she had gotten everything, even potentially edible, out of the fish now. She looked at her piles. There were 22 weird, unidentifiable fish organs. "Huh," she said. "Likewise, there are 72 books in the Catholic Bible, 72 letters in the Shem HaMepharash, 72 heartbeats per minute in a healthy human adult, 72 sides of number cards in the tarot, 72 pages in William Blake's poetical sketches, and 72 years to 1 degree of precession of the Earth's equinox." Sohu had finally extracted enough pieces of fish innard to put on a frying pan.
She placed it on a stove. Even though the stove was unconnected to any source of gas or electricity, it started burning with a thin blue flame. "In Kabbalah," Uriel continued, "we recognize certain divisions of Adam Cadman as especially important. A 4-fold division, which we interpret as 4 worlds. A 10-fold division, which we interpret as 10 Sephirot.
A 22-fold division, which we interpret as 22 paths between Sephirot, and a 72-fold division, which we interpret as the 72-fold explicit name of God. By understanding all of these divisions, we learn the structure of Adam Cadman and therefore the organizational principles of the universe. Once the organizational principles of the universe are understood, they can be changed. It is as easy as shooting fish in a barrel.
You're doing it on purpose now. There are many fish metaphors. Wait a second. If you can create stoves and ketchup bottles ex nihilo, how come you can't create food ex nihilo for me? The most basic division in the mystical body of God
Is the 10 Sephirot. Sephira is a Hebrew word related to the English sapphire, because the sages imagined them as sapphire-like jewels arranged in a string. The 10 Sephirot are a series of stages or levels or jewels through which divine power flows in its movement from God to the finite world. Each one corresponds to a specific divine attribute. The first represents the will of God, the second represents the wisdom of God, and so on. A spark appeared
on Uriel's finger, and in lines of fire he traced a diagram into the sky in front of him. There are 22 different paths between these jewels. Each corresponds to a particular Hebrew letter.
Sohu looked at the glowing diagram. "Okay," she said, "but what does all this mean?" "This was God's machine for creating the world," said Uriel. "It had many problems, so I hacked into it and made it emulate a different machine which runs the world my way. It involves many fewer surprises. It is important to know the structure of the original machine, both in order to control the emulation and because the emulation is no longer complete." "So the whole universe runs on this system of sapphires connected by paths?"
Most of it runs on sapphires on paths, but I use Ruby on Rails for the databases.
"Huh? Is that a different thing?" "We cannot talk now," said Uriel suddenly. "The butterflies are migrating." "What?" "I just realized. The butterflies are starting to migrate. It is only October. They should not migrate for several more months. I think I might have made an off by one error the last time I synchronized the insect migration algorithms. Can't you just let them migrate early? Every time a butterfly flaps its wings, it creates a cascading chain of after effects which can upset the entire course of history. If the entire butterfly migration happened at the wrong time, the result would be too horrible to imagine. Oh, I'm sorry. It is not your fault. I'm going to fix the butterfly migration. I will give you homework for tonight. All languages are isomorphic to Adam Cadman, but in different ways. You will need to compare and contrast them. Your homework assignment is to learn every human language. That's not something humans can realistically do? Oh. Then do something humans are good at. Fall in love, start a war. But the Archangel was no longer listening, focusing the attention of his glowing gold eyes on the stream of letters in front of him, already rearranging them with frightening speed. So who experimentally slathered one of the fried fish parts in ketchup, tentatively took a taste, then spit it out. Making sure Uriel was distracted with his butterflies, she furtively started squirting ketchup from the bottle straight onto her tongue. She swallowed, shrugged, and curled up on her cloud with her book and one of the ketchup bottles as the Archangel gesticulated above her. Notice also that the sharing is what enables us to increase the trespass of thy brethren. KingJamesProgramming.tumblr.com, May 11th, 2017. San Jose Campus Library hadn't changed much since I got expelled. I checked out 3 big books without even so much as a "you don't look like an Anna Thurmond," let alone Unsong goons hauling me off somewhere. Thank goodness for automatic card reader machines. On the other hand, there were Unsong goons in front of my house. I spotted them as soon as I got to our street. 3 big black vans parked in front of Ithaca. There were about a dozen officers. Soldiers? Let's stick with goons in black uniforms, organizing some kind of formation to knock on the door. My mind ran through all of the scenarios. Somehow Bill had found out why we needed his computer and ratted on us. No, there was no way for him to figure that out. And even though I didn't like the guy, he wasn't a Judas. Okay, maybe Unsong had just gotten generally tired of us hosting secret Unitarian meetings. It was possible. They'd gotten that group in Colorado. Maybe they were cracking down. Except that would mean that the whole thing with a vital name was a coincidence. And nothing was ever a coincidence. Then I thought of the drop-dead, simple, blindingly obvious answer, which was that Lull was well-ordered. Unless you gave it a random seed, it would always start in the same part of Maharaj space and go in the same direction, checking potential names in the same order. So if Unsong ever wanted to catch anyone who had found a way to make Lull work, all they would have to do is retrace Lull's steps by hand. Through unfortunate coincidence, it was only a couple of hours before Lull got its first name, the sort of performance a good sweatshop could replicate in a week. Unsong had handed the Lull Maharaj ordering over to a sweatshop, gotten the first name out of it, that stupid moon-finding name no less, and then tattooed it on the ears of their sentinels, just in case. Frick. They were smart. They were operating at a level so far above me I couldn't even see them. I had really blown it. S stands for secret. I could hear my great-uncle intoning from beyond the grave. You'll keep it forever, provided there's nobody else who is clever. Well, other people had been clever. Anna was right. Nobody else can possibly be as smart as I am, was such an Aaron Smith Teller way to think. If I'd thought for 2 seconds, I would have given Lull a random seed, and Anna! Anna was in that house. Anna was in danger. Also Erica. Also, depending on who had been able to pay their rent last month, somewhere between 6 and 8 other Stevensite Unitarians whom I was on moderately good terms with, and Sarah. What happened if Unsong got Sarah? It was too terrible to think about, and yet approximately 0% of my brain's emotional capacity was devoted to worrying about my super-powerful magic computer. Anna, my limbic system screamed. She was my weird platonic sort of girlfriend, except we were just friends, and I wasn't supposed to call her that. That was a bond stronger than death. Anna was in danger. Anna, I thought. No answer. Obviously too stressed for telepathy right now, the overt meaning of teller is someone who narrates a story. The Kabbalistic meaning is someone who calls down destructive celestial energies. This reading we derived from my great-uncle. who also had a bad track record for making reasonable choices and avoiding apocalypses. I blew up the front wall of my house. It was a simple name, the Avalanche name, only 11 letters. Not very good at hurting people, but excellent for collapsing buildings. Also good at getting people's attention. Anna was a sound sleeper. Once she told me she wouldn't wake up even if the house fell down around her. I figured she was exaggerating. I guess we would find out. Unsong's attention was also gotten. The agents turned, looking around frantically. I'd crouched behind a car and they didn't see me. They started to fan out, pistols at the ready. One reason that people become singers is the lure of fighting a magical duel. It would be pretty neat, wouldn't it? You chant terrible warlike names. Your shadowy opponent deflects or neutralizes them with the power of his own arcane knowledge. And at last the most esoterically learned man wins, standing dreadful above a pile of rubble, while onlookers gaze in awe and think, there is a Kabbalist. In reality, saying even a very short name takes 3 seconds or so. Pressing a trigger takes 1/10 that. So magical duels are right out, unless your opponent has forgotten his gun, which one can usually count on Unsong not doing. If you had the right clippa, you could work out a system where almost no regular speech counted as continuation of a name, started at leisure, and then say the last syllable when you needed it. But of course I hadn't prepared anything of the sort, and great masters like the old rabbis or the archangel Uriel could access higher worlds where all bets were off. But me, I was going to need 3 seconds, during which I was a sitting duck. I spoke the tenebrous name and plunged the street into darkness. Fighting a magical duel was incredibly dumb, but no one had ever claimed it wasn't awesome. While they were adjusting, I spoke the bulletproof name, which would protect me from exactly 1 bullet. Names must be spoken clearly and distinctly. Unless you're the Comet King or something, you can't get much more than 8 or 10 letters a second. The bulletproof name was 40 letters, which meant 4 to 5 seconds. That meant I wasn't so much safe as safe from anyone who couldn't shoot me twice within a 4-second interval. Once again, I did not expect Unsong to have that problem. My goal was to get Anna, get the computers, and speak the vanishing name. The darkness of the tenebrous name was near absolute, but 3 flashlights clicked on before I'd crawled out from the car. I had to admit my chances of getting in the house looked pretty slim, as 3 of the agents had taken to guarding the porch. So I ran to the side of the house. The ascending name would send me up to the balcony, but they would probably hear me, either through the sentinel name or the normal channels. My options were kind of limited. I spoke it anyway, fast as I could, and got hit by a bullet. It hurt. I jumped through where the front window would be if I hadn't collapsed the front of the house and made it into the apartment above ours. I spoke the bulletproof name again, 6 seconds. Then I used the Avalanche name to punch a hole in the floor and fall into my bedroom. Anna was gone. That was good. It meant she had spoken the vanishing name and escaped. The computer was still there, whirring and grinding. That was bad. 5 Unsong agents were pointing their guns at me, daring me to start chanting. That was very bad. I'm not exactly sure what my endgame had been here. Like breaking into the room had been an achievement, but probably the reaction of the agents who had already made it into the room would be to point their guns at me, like they were doing now. Like my knowledge and practice of magic had been impeccable. No one could have faulted me for that. But in terms of common sense, I had utterly dropped the ball. This might be a good place to mention I'd never actually been in anything remotely resembling a magical duel before. Or a non-magical duel. Any kind of duel, really. I had been in a bar fight once and ended up with 2 black eyes. "Put your hands up and keep your mouth shut," said one of the agents. Slowly, I put my hands up. An agent came from behind and blindfolded me. Someone put a gag in my mouth and cuffs on my hands. I was led into what must have been the big black van. We drove off.